Welcome to this quiet corner of history, where words flow like a gentle river under moonlight. Picture yourself lying in a cozy spot, a faint candle flickering nearby, as I weave a tale from the ancient past. I'm your narrator, and tonight, in Boring History for Sleep, we're diving into the world of Rome. Our theme is gripping, yet told with a soothing calm to lull you into rest. Roman traps were so dangerous you wouldn't even have time to react. Let's close our eyes and journey to dusty battlefields, towering fortresses, and tense moments where human cunning met the raw edge of war. Relax, let the day's worries melt away, and allow me to guide you through this slow, immersive tale, rich with details that wrap around you like a warm blanket. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this, so you don't miss a whisper of the past. Let's start at the beginning, as if we're sitting by a crackling fire on a starry night. The Roman Empire wasn't built on swords and shields alone. No, its strength lay in cunning, in the ability to outsmart every foe. Picture a Roman legionary, his leather and metal armor heavy under the scorching Gallic sun. He wasn't just a warrior. Deep down, he was an engineer, trained to turn the very landscape into a deadly maze. Imagine the ground beneath his feet, becoming a treacherous ally, hiding deep pits with sharpened stakes waiting for the unwary. These traps weren't mere accidents. They were the product of centuries of military evolution, where every stone placed, every ditch dug, told a story of survival and dominance. Let's step back further, to the dawn of Rome, when the city was just a cluster of hills surrounded by marshes and rivers. In those early days of the Republic, around the 5th century before Christ, the Romans were already learning that brute force wasn't enough. They faced enemies on all sides, Sabines and later, the fierce tribes of the north. Survival meant thinking ahead, turning the earth itself into a weapon. A farmer named Lucius, let's say, stood on a hill overlooking his small plot of land, not far from the Tiber River. He wasn't just guarding crops, he was watching for raiders, knowing his village's wooden palisade could only do so much. One day, as he repaired a fence, he noticed how icily a cart's wheels sank into the soft, muddy ground. An idea sparked. What if they could use the land's natural dips and ruts against invaders? Dig a little deeper, hide the hole with branches, and suddenly, a charging enemy would find themselves stumbling into a trap. This wasn't warfare as we imagine it today, with grand strategies and gleaming blades. It was gritty, practical, born from the sweat and dirt of everyday life. The Romans didn't invent traps, of course. Other ancient peoples, Greeks, Persians, even the tribes of the Italian peninsula used similar tactics. But the Romans perfected them, turning deception into an art form. They studied their enemies, learned their habits, and crafted defenses that exploited every weakness. A narrow path through a forest could become a death trap, lined with hidden spikes. A seemingly safe riverbank might conceal a trench that would swallow a horse's leg. These early Romans, like Lucius, weren't just fighting for land. We're fighting for a future, for a city that would one day rule the world. And in those muddy fields and rocky hills, they laid the groundwork for a legacy of ingenuity that would echo through centuries. Picture that same hill where Lucius stood. Now, a generation later, the village has grown, its walls stronger, its people more organized. The Romans are starting to see themselves not just as farmers or warriors, but as builders of something greater. Their traps evolved too, no longer just holes in the ground, but carefully planned obstacles integrated into their camps and battle lines. By the time the Republic is in full swing, around the 4th century before Christ, these tactics are becoming a hallmark of Roman warfare. The soldiers, disciplined and relentless, march out to face their enemies. But they don't just rely on their swords. They carry shovels, picks, and a mindset that every battlefield can be shaped to their advantage. This mindset, this blend of grit and genius, is what we'll explore next. The early Republic wasn't just a time of survival, it was a crucible, where the Romans forged their identity as masters of strategy. In our next chapter, we'll walk through the dusty streets of a growing Rome, where the seeds of these deadly traps were planted, and where men like Lucius began to dream of an empire, built not just on strength, but on cunning. As we wander those dusty streets of a burgeoning Rome, feel the warm breeze carrying the scent of olive groves and fresh-baked bread from nearby hearths. The early Republic, in the 4th century before Christ, was a time of constant threat, where every hill and valley whispered a potential invasion. Men like our imagined Lucius didn't just till the soil, they studied it, learning how its contours could hide dangers that turned the tide of battle. This was the era when Roman cunning took root, sprouting from the necessity of a small city-state surrounded by rivals. The Etruscans to the north, with their advanced metals and chariots, pressed hard, while the Samnites and the rugged Apennines fought with guerrilla ferocity. But the Romans, adaptable, began to weave deception into their warfare, not as a last resort, but as a foundational strategy. Imagine Lucius now as a young centurion, his calloused hands gripping a spade rather than a sword on a misty morning. The year is around 390 before Christ, just after the sack of Rome by the Gauls, a humiliating defeat that scarred the collective memory. The city lay in ruins, its people huddled behind makeshift barriers, Lucius and his comrades, under the stern gaze of leaders like Camillus, rebuilt not just walls but a philosophy of defense. They dug wide ditches around the Servian wall, filling them with sharpened stakes harvested from nearby woods. These weren't elaborate machines yet. They were simple, brutal innovations born from desperation. A charging Gaul, his long hair whipping in the wind, might leap the outer barrier only to plummet into a hidden facade, deep trench lined with pointed wooden spikes that pierced flesh and bone without mercy. The cries of the fallen echoed through the valleys, a grim symphony that deterred others. This cunning wasn't innate. It evolved from hard lessons. In the wars against the Volsci and Aqui hill tribes who raided with lightning speed, the Romans learned to turn the terrain against them. Picture a narrow pass in the Alban hills where Lucius's legion sets up camp. They don't just pitch tents. They transform the site into a fortress of illusions. Branches are woven into camouflaged barriers, concealing caltrops, those four-pronged iron spikes scattered like deadly seeds on the ground. An enemy horseman, galloping in the dim light of dawn, feels his mount rear in agony as a caltrop embeds in its hoof, throwing rider and beast into chaos. Then comes the Roman counterattack. Swift and merciless, their pilum javelins raining down like angry hornets. But it's the traps that break the spirit first. Sowing doubt in every step, as the Republic expanded, these tactics refined into a system. By the 3rd century before Christ, during the Samnite Wars, Roman engineers, often slaves or freedmen with a knack for mechanics, introduced more sophisticated snares. In the Battle of the Cadine Forks in 321 before Christ, the Samnites turned the tables, trapping a Roman army in a defile with blocked exits and felled trees. The humiliation of passing under the yoke, a symbolic submission, burned in Roman minds. They vowed never to be caught again. Lucius's descendants, now seasoned commanders, responded by mastering ambush prevention. They scouted with speculators, elite scouts who moved like shadows, mapping every ravine and ford in retaliation. Romans dug lily pits, named for their flower-like arrangement of stakes at the bottom around their marching camps. These pits, about a meter deep and disguised with turf and leaves, waited silently. A Samnite warrior, sneaking close under cover of night, might step wrong, his leg snapping as he falls onto the upward-pointing barbs. The pain, sharp and immediate, alerts the camp, turning potential surprise into Roman advantage. Feel the rhythm of those days, the steady thud of shovels in earth, the metallic tang of forged iron in the air, the low murmurs of soldiers sharing tales around campfires. It wasn't all grim. There was camaraderie, a shared pride in outwitting foes. One story whispers through time of a clever engineer named Marcus, who during a siege of a Samnite hillfort, devised a rolling trap. Boulders, held by ropes on a slope, were released at the right moment, crashing down on advancing enemies with thunderous force. The ground shook, dust clouded the sky, and what was once an assault became a rout. Marcus wasn't a noble. He was a commoner, elevated by his wits, embodying the Roman ideal that merit, not birth, won wars. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's keep uncovering these serene echoes of history together. Yet these roots of cunning extended beyond the battlefield into the very ethos of the Republic. The Senate debated not just legions, but logistics, how to supply tools for traps across vast distances. Iron from Etruria, wood from the forests of Latium, all funneled into an arsenal of deception. By the time of the Pyrrhic Wars against the Greek king Pyrrhus in the late 3rd century before Christ, Romans integrated Greek influences, like the use of war elephants, but twisted them with their traps. In one clash, they scattered stimulant, spiked devices before their lines, crippling the beast's feet and causing panic in the enemy ranks. Pyrrhus won battles, but at such cost that Pyrrhic victory became a term for hollow triumph. The Romans, patient and persistent, wore him down with these unseen perils. As the sun sets on this chapter of origins, envision Lucius's legacy enduring. In the disciplined ranks that would conquer the Mediterranean, the early Republic forged not just soldiers, but thinkers who saw every landscape as a canvas for traps. But as Rome's ambitions grew, so did the scale of their deceptions, spilling onto open fields where the first grand military ruses unfolded. We'll step onto those battlegrounds next, where the clash of armies met the subtlety of hidden dangers, and where a single misstep could end it all in an instant. Stepping onto those vast battlegrounds now, where the open plains of Italy stretched like a canvas for Roman ingenuity, we can almost hear the distant rumble of chariots and the shouts of commanders echoing across the windswept fields. By the mid-3rd century before Christ, as Rome clashed with Carthage in the First Punic War, the early military deceptions had blossomed into calculated spectacles of surprise. No longer confined to hills and walls, these traps sprawled across open terrain where legions formed up in their iconic checkerboard formations, but with hidden perils woven into the very grass underfoot. Picture the sun-baked Sicilian plains in 264 before Christ, where Roman consul Appius Claudius leads his men against Carthaginian forces. The enemy, confident in their naval prowess, spilling onto land, charges forward only to find the ground giving way beneath them. The Romans had spent the night digging shallow trenches, camouflaged with sod and scattered debris, turning what seemed a flat field into a honeycomb of hazards. Horses stumbled, lines broke, and in that chaos, the disciplined Roman infantry closed in, their short swords glinting like fangs in the daylight. These deceptions weren't born of whimsy. They stemmed from the harsh lessons of earlier conflicts, like the Pyrrhic Wars we touched on before. Pyrrhus, with his Hellenistic phalanxes and trumpeting elephants, had taught the Romans that brute force could be undone by subtlety. At the Battle of Heraclea in 280 before Christ, Pyrrhus used his beasts to shatter Roman lines, but the Romans adapted swiftly. In subsequent engagements, they scattered caltrops, those insidious iron spikes, across the paths where elephants were funneled. Imagine the massive creatures, their grey hides heaving with effort, trumpeting in confusion as sharp points pierced their tender feet. Panic rippled through the ranks. What was meant to be a terrifying charge devolved into a stampede, often turning back on Pyrrhus's own troops. The Romans, watching from behind their shields, learned that deception could neutralize even the mightiest weapons, sowing fear as effectively as any blade. As the wars dragged on, these battlefield traps grew more intricate, blending engineering with psychology. Fast forward to the Second Punic War, around 218 before Christ, when Hannibal's invasion tested Roman resolve like never before. At the Battle of Trebia, Hannibal lured the Romans across a freezing river with a feigned retreat, his new cavalry darting away like shadows, drawing the eager consul Sempronius into the trap. But the Romans, though caught this time, internalized the tactic. In later skirmishes, they mirrored it, feigning weakness to entice enemies into prepared killing zones. One such instance unfolded in the Iberian campaigns under Scipio Africanus. Scipio, a master of adaptation, positioned his legions on a gentle slope near Ilaturgi in 215 before Christ. His scouts reported Carthaginian scouts probing the lines, so he ordered hidden pits, those Lilia we mentioned earlier, dug in staggered rows before the front ranks. Covered with brush and light soil, they lay invisible in the dawn mist. When the enemy advanced, confident in their numbers, the first wave plunged into the voids, stakes impaling legs and torsos amid cries that shattered the morning calm. The ground, once firm, became a betrayer, halting the charge and exposing the disorganized foes to Roman javelins, arcing through the air like lethal rain. Feel the tension in those moments. The earthy scent of freshly turned soil mixing with the metallic bite of blood, the low hum of wind over shields, and the sudden heart-stopping snap of a trap springing. It wasn't just about the physical snares. Deception played on the mind, turning anticipation into dread. Roman commanders like Fabius Maximus, the delayer, embodied this in his Fabian strategy against Hannibal. He avoided direct battle, instead, using guerrilla traps, ambushes in narrow valleys where felled trees and rock slides could be triggered by hidden ropes. In one fabricated tale that echoes real accounts, a centurion named Gaius sets up near the Apulian fields. His men, under cover of night, rig boulders on a ridge with taut lines held by stakes. As Hannibal's foragers approach at dusk, mistaking the quiet for safety, a signal yank releases the cascade. Rocks tumble with a roar, crushing shields and men alike, the dust clouding the sunset like a veil of doom. Hannibal, ever the genius, respected such cunning, but it wore down his army's morale. Each step fraught with invisible threats. These early deceptions reached a pinnacle in the open fields of Cannae in 216 before Christ, though ironically, it was Hannibal who orchestrated the ultimate trap. He formed his center line thin, drawing the massive Roman army into a bulging pocket, then enveloped them with his flanks. Over 50,000 Romans perished in that dusty cauldron, a lesson in how deception could annihilate even the mightiest force. Yet, from this catastrophe, Rome emerged wiser. Survivors whispered of the need for better reconnaissance, leading to enhanced use of speculators who mapped terrains for potential traps. In the aftermath, during the reconquest of southern Italy, Romans turned the tables. At the Battle of the Metaros in 207 before Christ, Consul Claudius Nero used a night march deception, feigning a static camp with fires and dummies while his forces flanked Hasdrubal's army. But woven into this were ground traps, spiked ditches along expected retreat paths, where fleeing Carthaginians tumbled in the dark, their screams blending with a night's chorus of owls and crickets. Not all deceptions were grand. Some were intimate, human-scale surprises that highlighted the ingenuity of the common soldier. A legionary named Quintus, perhaps a descendant of our earlier Marcus, might crouch in the tall grass of a Campanian meadow, planting Sude's portable wooden stakes that could be hammered into the earth to form instant barriers in a skirmish. Against lingering Samnite holdouts, these stakes, tipped with iron and angled forward, halted a cavalry charge mid-gallop. Horses reared, riders catapulted forward into waiting Roman spears. The clash a brief, brutal ballet. Quintus, wiping sweat from his brow, would later share the tale around a flickering campfire, the warmth contrasting the chill of remembered peril. These moments built the legend of Roman resilience, where where traps weren't just tools, but extensions of the soldiers will dot as the dust settles on these early battlefields. With the sun dipping low and casting long shadows over the scarred earth, we see how deceptions evolved from simple pits to symphony of strategy. But behind every trap lay the hands that built them, the legionaries whose sweat and skill turned ideas into reality. We'll delve into their world next, exploring the daily grind of construction, the tools that shaped death from dirt, and the unbreakable spirit that fortified Rome's defenses. Delving into the world of those legionaries now, we can sense the weight of their tools and calloused hands, the earthy aroma of fresh-dug soil mingling with the sharp timbres of oiled leather and iron. These men, the backbone of Rome's might, weren't mere fighters. They were builders, craftsmen who turned raw landscapes into impregnable fortresses overnight, emerging from the battlefields we just traversed, where traps claimed victories as surely as swords. The ingenuity of the legion shown in their daily labors. By the late Republic, around the 2nd century before Christ, a standard legion some 5,000 strong included not just infantry but immune specialists, exempt from regular duties to focus on engineering. Picture a camp at dusk, torches flickering like stars against the darkening sky, as these men swung mattocks and shovels with rhythmic precision. Their castra, or marching camps, were marvels of efficiency, rectangular layouts with ramparts, ditches, and palisades erected in hours, each element laced with traps to repel nocturnal raids. Take a soldier like Decimus, a grizzled veteran from the Iberian campaigns under Scipio. His day began before dawn, not with a charge into battle, but with a grind of preparation. Armed with a Delabra pickaxe on one side, axe on the other, he and his concubinium, a tense group of 8 comrades, would scout the terrain, look for soft earth, their centurion might bark, pointing to a gentle rise near a stream. There they dug the Fossa Principalis, a main ditch about 3 meters wide and 2 deep. Its sides sloped to prevent easy climbing, but ingenuity lay in the details. At the bottom, they planted days, those portable stakes sharpened to lethal points, angled upward like waiting spears, covered lightly with branches and soil. The ditch became a silent killer. An Iberian tribesman, creeping close under moonlight, might test the edge and only to slip, the stakes tearing through sandal and flesh in a flash of agony that alerted the watch. This building wasn't haphazard. It followed the doctrines of military writers like Polybius, who described Roman camps as cities in miniature. The legion carried everything needed: tents, tools, even pre-cut stakes, bundled on mules. In the wars against Mithridates in Asia Minor around 88 before Christ, such defenses proved vital. Decimus's legion, facing Pontic archers and cavalry, fortified a hilltop near the Black Sea. They layered traps in concentric rings, outermost scattered caltrops forged in camp smithies for spikes, ensuring one always pointed up, crippling horses' hooves with a cruel puncture. Closer in, lilia pits dotted the approaches, each a meter across, disguised with turf that matched the surrounding grass. The scent of pine resin from nearby forests masked the fresh dirt, lulling enemies into false security. When Mithridates' scouts probed, one vanished into a pit, his muffled cry swallowed by the wind, time enough for Roman slingers to unleash lead bullets from the ramparts. Feel the camaraderie in those labors, backs bent under the sun, jokes traded in rough Latin to ease the ache, the clink of tools, a steady heartbeat. It wasn't all toil. There was pride in creation, in knowing their hands shaped victory. One evening, as Decimus hammered stakes into a palisade, he might recall a trick from the Gallic War's false gates, tempting bait for attackers. These portals, weakly guarded on purpose, led straight into kill zones, narrow funnels lined with hidden scythes on pivots, swung by ropes to sweep low and maim legs. In a skirmish near the Rhine, such a setup decimated a Germanic warband. The chieftain, bold and bearded, charged the weak spot, his warriors howling behind only for the ground to erupt in chaos, blades whistling through the air, turning advance into slaughter. The survivors fled, whispering of Roman sorcery, but it was pure ingenuity, born from the legionary sweat. Subscribe if you like the video, and join us in these tranquil journeys through time. Yet, building defenses extended beyond camps to sieges, where legionary creativity peaked. During the siege of Numantia in 133 before Christ, Scipio Aemilianus encircled the Celtiberian stronghold with a massive circumvallation, double walls, towers, and a web of traps. Legionaries like Decimus constructed giant crossbows, launching bolts or stones, but integrated them with ground snares. Approach paths were mined with Scipi, stone pillars half buried and chained together, tripping charges. Deeper, wolf pits, deep excavations with converging walls, easy to fall into but impossible to escape, waited for the desperate. One Numantian, driven by hunger, attempted a sortie at night. He evaded patrols only to tumble into such a pit, the earthen walls closing around him like a grave, his shouts fading into the starry void. Scipio's men, efficient as always, filled these with water from diverted streams, turning them into drowning traps that gleamed ominously under the moon. The tools of their trade were extensions of their bodies, the groma for surveying straight lines, ensuring ditches aligned perfectly, the falx for clearing brush, hiding traps in natural cover. In the civil wars of the late Republic, under Caesar, this ingenuity turned inward. At Alesia in 52 before Christ, Caesar's legions built a double fortification, one facing Vercingetorix's Gauls inside, another outward against reinforcements. Miles of trenches bristled with stimuli-branched stakes like deer antlers and iron hooks embedded in logs, rolled down slopes to entangle attackers. A legionary named Titus perhaps positioned these during lulls, the iron cold against his palm, knowing each placement could save lives. When 250,000 Gallic relief forces assaulted, they met a nightmare, feet snagged on hooks, bodies impaled on branches, the air thick with dust and despair. Caesar's commentaries praise the work, but it's the unnamed legionaries who wrought it. Their defense a testament to Roman grit. As night falls on these builders, campfires dotting the horizon like watchful eyes. We appreciate how their ingenuity fortified not just positions, but the empire's soul. From simple ditches to elaborate siege works, they transformed vulnerability into strength. But behind the structures lay the stories of the soldiers themselves, their fears, hopes, and the human cost of endless war. We'll linger with them next, sharing a day in the life of a warrior, where the line between builder and battler blurred in the haze of ancient dawns. Lingering with those soldiers now, around the flickering campfires where shadows danced like forgotten spirits, we can almost taste the simple stew bubbling over the flames, barley porridge laced with scraps of salted pork, a meager comfort after a day of unyielding toil. The life of a Roman warrior, like our Decimus or Titus from the siege works we just explored, was a tapestry of routine punctuated by bursts of peril, where building traps intertwined with the raw humanity of survival. Dawn broke early in the Castra, the bugle's call piercing the chill air like a distant eagle's cry. A legionnaire, let's name him Valerius, a sturdy farm boy from the Po Valley enlisted during Caesar's Gallic campaigns, would rise from his woolen blanket, shaking off the dew that clung like a cold embrace. His first task, inspection of the knight's defenses, ensuring the Lilia pits and Sudace stakes hadn't shifted in the frost-heaved earth. Check every inch, his centurion would growl, vine staff in hand, as Valerius probed the camouflaged hazards with a long pole, the wood scraping against hidden iron with a reassuring rasp. Breakfast was hasty, a hunk of hard bread dipped in olive oil, washed down with posca, that vinegary water that quenched thirst without dulling senses. Then came the march, if the day called for it, 20 miles under a 50-pound pack, the hobnailed Caligay boots crunching gravel paths that snaked through Gaul's misty forests. But Valerius wasn't just marching, he was scouting for trap potential. Eyes sharp, he'd note a boggy meadow or a thicket of brambles, perfect for concealing caltrops or tripwires. In one such day, around 58 before Christ, near the Rhine, his cohort halted to fortify a ford. Valerius, spade in hand, joined the dig, a series of shallow trenches across the shallows, filled with sharpened branches mimicking river weeds. An approaching Germanic scout, wading confidently, might snag his foot, the branch snapping upward like a serpent strike, gashing deep and turning the water red. The pain, instant and blinding, would echo his fall, buying time for Roman archers perched on the bank. Midday brought drills, the clash of glady swords against shields ringing like a blacksmith's symphony. Yet, woven in were lessons in deception, how to rig a false camp, tents pitched with fire smoldering to draw enemies into a kill zone laced with wolf pits. Valerius, sweating under his larica segmentata armor, practiced the swing of a faux to clear underbrush, hiding ropes that could trigger logfalls, massive timbers suspended from trees, released to crush advancing foes. A comrade's tale from the previous night's watch might interrupt. Remember Lucius at Versailles? He set a snare with baited hooks, dangling meat to lure wolves, but it caught a spy instead, tangled and howling till dawn. Laughter rippled, easing the tension, but beneath it lay the grim reality. These stories masked the fear of being on the receiving end, of stepping into an unseen Gallic ambush where similar traps awaited. As the sun climbed, labor intensified. If not marching, Valerius might join a foraging party, axes felling trees for palisades while others dug. Picture him, knee-deep in mud, shaping a fossa with sloping sides, then lining it with pillar muralia wall stakes, repurposed as bottom barbs. The air filled with the scent of pine sap and sweat, the rhythmic thud of tools, a lullaby of purpose. But danger lurked even here. A sudden raid could turn builders into battlers in one invented but plausible skirmish near the Ain River. Valerius's group was ambushed by Belgae warriors. Quick thinking saved them. He yanked a preset rope, unleashing a cascade of rocks from a rigged embankment, the boulders tumbling with a roar that scattered the attackers like leaves in a gale. Bruised but alive, he returned to camp, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion, sharing the tale over wine rations that warmed the belly like a hearth's glow. Subscribe if you liked the video and stay with us as we drift through these ancient whispers, merged into evening with more drills or maintenance, sharpening to labre, forging new caltrops in portable anvils heated by charcoal fires. The metallic clang blended with the low hum of conversation, homesick murmurs of Italian vineyards or boasts of past conquests. Valerius, perhaps mending a torn tunic by firelight, would reflect on the human toll. Not all days ended in triumph. Some brought loss. A friend might fall into an enemy trap during patrol, a hidden noose tightening around an ankle, dragging him into thorns laced with poison. The screams raw and desperate, haunted dreams, reminding that traps cut both ways. Yet, resilience, to find them, a quick burial, a shared prayer to Mars, and onward, forging new defenses to honor the fallen. Night watch was the quiet climax, stars wheeling overhead like silent sentinels. Valerius, wrapped in his sogum cloak against the chill, paced the ramparts, ears attuned to every rustle. Traps became his allies in the dark, the subtle creak of a tripwire, the muffled thud of a pit claiming an intruder. One moonless night, in the Arduena forest, he heard it snap, followed by a guttural curse. Racing with torch in hand, he found a Gaul ensnared in a lilia pit, stakes piercing his thigh, blood pooling like dark wine. The captive's eyes, wide with shock, mirrored Valerius's own mortality. Interrogation followed, yielding secrets of enemy camps, but mercy was rare. The trap had done its job, swift and unforgiving. As the fire dies to embers, casting a soft glow on weary faces, we see how a warrior's day wove ingenuity with endurance, each trap a thread in the fabric of empire. From dawn's preparations to night's vigilance, their stories humanized the machinery of war. But these tales often unfolded in the shadowy embrace of forests, where ambushes turned nature itself into a deadly partner. We'll venture into those wooded depths next, where Roman traps met the wild heart of Gaul, and whispers of leaves concealed screams of the unwary. Venturing into those wooded depths now, where the ancient forests of Gaul loomed like silent guardians, their canopy filtering sunlight into dappled patterns that played tricks on the eye. We follow warriors like Valerius deeper into the heart of untamed wilderness. The ambushes here, born from the daily vigilance we just shared, transformed thickets and trails into labyrinths of peril, where Roman ingenuity clashed with the wild spirit of the land. By 58 before Christ, as Caesar's legions pushed northward, the dense Ardennes and Vosges woods became battlegrounds of shadow and surprise. Valerius's boots, sinking into leaf mold soft as a whisper, knew every rustle could herald danger or opportunity. The Gauls, masters of guerrilla warfare, struck from cover, but the Romans countered with traps that turned nature's veil against them, each snare a testament to patient craft amid the chorus of birdsong and creaking branches. Imagine the scene, a narrow path winding through oaks and beeches, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and wild garlic. Valerius's cohort, under orders from Caesar himself, halts to secure the route. They don't charge blindly. Instead, they weave deception into the foliage. Tripwires stored vines strung low between trees, connected to bent saplings loaded with spiked logs lie in wait. A Gallic scout, his torque glinting faintly in a shaft of light, steps unwittingly. The wire snaps, unleashing the log in a whistling arc that crushes shield and skull alike. No time to react, just the thud of impact, echoing through the undergrowth, alerting Roman sentries hidden nearby. These whips of the forest, as soldiers called them, were simple yet devastating, rigged in hours with axes and ropes carried in every legionary's kit. Deeper into the traps grew more insidious, exploiting the forest's natural hazards. Wolf pits, evolved here into silver-fassy forest, ditches camouflaged with interwoven branches and fallen leaves, mimicking the uneven terrain. Valerius, spade in hand during a midday lull, digs one such pit, 2 meters deep, walls converging to trap the fallen, bottom lined with fire-hardened stakes smeared in animal fat to slip through flesh effortlessly. A band of Ambioni warriors, charging through the mist-shrouded trees in 57 before Christ, near the Sabis River, meets this fate. Their war cries turn to shrieks as the ground collapses, bodies impaled in a tangle of limbs and blood, the metallic scent mingling with the earthy musk. The survivors hesitate, arrows from concealed Roman archers positioned in tree platforms whistling down like vengeful spirits. Caesar's commentaries note such ambushes, crediting the legion's foresight for turning potential routes into victories. But the Gauls adapted, forcing Roman innovation. In the dense Hercynian forest, stretching endlessly like a green sea, ambushes became a deadly dance. The Romans introduced Scorpio traps, miniature ballistae hidden in brush, triggered by pressure plates of flattened reeds. Picture Valerius calibrating one, a bolt tipped with barbed iron, coiled torsion ropes humming with tension. A Treveri chieftain, leading a raid under cover of fog, treads the plate. The mechanism releases with a sharp twang, the bolt piercing armor and pinning him to a trunk. His gasp, cut short, signals the trap's success. No reaction time, just instant doom amid the fog's chill embrace. These devices, portable and quick to set, dotted forest clearings, their presence betrayed only by the faint creak of wood in the wind. Feel the immersion in those woods, the cool drip of dew from leaves, the distant howl of wolves blending with human peril, the soft crunch of boots on ferns. It wasn't all terror. Moments of quiet beauty punctuated the tension, a shaft of sunlight illuminating a deer's graceful leap, or the murmur of a stream where soldiers refilled canteens. Yet, underlying it all was the human element. Valerius sharing a hushed story with comrades about a narrow escape. Last moon, near the Moselle, he'd whisper a Gaul set a snare with poisoned thorns. I felt the prick, but our medicus had the antidote. Barely such tales fostered wariness, honing skills that made Roman traps deadlier. In one clash during the revolt of Ambiorix in 54 before Christ, legions under Quintus Cicero fortified a camp amid the Eburones forests. They ringed it with abattoir-felled trees, with sharpened branches pointing outward, interwoven with caltrops and hidden pits. When the Gauls assaulted at dawn, waves broke against this barrier. Feet mangled, advances halted, the air thick with dust and despair as Roman javelins found their marks. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's continue drifting through these veiled histories together. Ambush tactics peaked in the infamous Teutoburg forest disaster of 9 after Christ. Though that's a later tale. In Gaul, successes outweighed failures. Caesar's men mastered feigned retreats, luring pursuers into prepared glades. At Alesia's outer lines, engineers rigged rolling barriers, carts filled with stones, released down slopes into wooded ravines. Vercingetorix's reinforcements, crashing through underbrush, met these tumbling juggernauts with splintering, men crushed beneath the weight, no chance to dodge in the confined spaces. The ground shook, leaves swirling in the chaos, turning pursuit into panic. Valerius, perhaps manning the ropes, would feel the strain in his arms, the satisfaction of outsmarting foes who knew the land better, as twilight filters through the canopy, painting the forest in hues of amber and shadow. We emerged from these ambushes with a sense of the relentless ingenuity that tamed the wild. Traps here weren't just defenses, they were extensions of the soldier's will, blending with nature's own cruelty. But some snares delved even deeper, literally into the earth's embrace, where falls were swift and unforgiving. We'll descend into those cruel pits next, exploring the abyssal terrors that swallowed enemies whole, leaving only echoes in the dark. Descending into those cruel pits now, where the earth opened like hungry maws beneath unsuspecting feet. We feel the chill of shadowed depths rising to meet the forest's lingering mist, blending the wild above with the unforgiving below. The ambushes in Gaul's woods, with their whispers and snaps, often culminated in these abyssal terrors, Farsi and Lilia, that swallowed men whole, their falls as swift as a heartbeat skip. Valerius, our steadfast legionary from the shadowed trails, knew these pits intimately. He dug them under Caesar's watchful eye, turning soft soil into silent graves that demanded no warning, only gravity's merciless pull. In the campaigns of 52 before Christ, amid the sieges and skirmishes, such traps became Rome's unseen enforcers, where a single misstep plunged warriors into darkness, their cries muffled by the very ground that betrayed them. Picture the preparation: a clearing edged by ancient oaks, the air thick with the scent of loam and crushed ferns, as Valerius and his comrades labored under a gray sky. The fossa, a deep trench perhaps 3 meters down and 2 across, was excavated with delabrae swinging in steady arcs, the earth piled discreetly to one side, but cruelty lay in the disguised branches latticed overhead, sprinkled with leaves and turf to mimic solid ground. Below, the walls sloped inward, making escape a futile scramble, fingers clawing at slick clay. At the bottom waited the true horror: stakes of hardened oak, points fire-charred for durability, arranged in clusters like jagged teeth. A Gallic horseman, galloping through what seemed a safe glade, would feel the world vanish, horse and rider tumbling in a whirl of dust and panic, the stakes piercing hide and flesh with a wet thud that echoed briefly before silence reclaimed the pit. No time to brace, no chance to cry out. The fall was the trap's cold embrace. These unexpected falls weren't reserved for forests alone. They dotted battle lines and camp perimeters, evolving from the early Republican defenses we explored into sophisticated instruments of terror. In the open fields of the Po Valley during the Cimbrian Wars around 101 before Christ, Consul Marius deployed vast arrays of such pits against the migrating Teutons. Imagine a Teutonic warband, their blonde braids swinging as they charged with axes raised, confident in their numbers. The ground, seemingly firm under the summer sun, collapses under the lead warriors. A cascade of bodies into the void, stakes impaling thighs and torsos amid roars turning to gurgles. The rear ranks halt in confusion, exposed to Roman slingers, barrage stones cracking skulls like ripe melons. Marius, ever the tactician, had his men dig these in patterns, staggered rows to channel foes into narrower paths, amplifying the chaos. The pit's cruelty was psychological too. Survivors whispered of the earth's hunger, eroding morale as surely as any defeat. Deeper still, the Lilia pits, named for their lily-like bloom of stakes, added a floral macabre to the cruelty. Smaller, about a meter wide and deep, they peppered approaches like deadly flowers in a meadow. Valerius, during a night watch near the Seine, might plant dozens, a central stake surrounded by radiating barbs, the whole concealed under a thin layer of sod. A Venetized scout, creeping barefoot to avoid noise, steps true. The ground yields, his foot snared on the central point, the others slashing as he thrashes. The pain blooms instant and overwhelming, no reaction beyond a stifled gasp before Roman guards descend. In the siege of Avricum in 52 before Christ, Caesar ringed the town with thousands of these, turning the surrounding fields into a minefield of falls. Gallic sorties, desperate for supplies, ventured out at dusk. One after another, men vanished into the earth, their muffled agony a nocturne that kept the besieged awake, pondering surrender. Feel the weight of those moments, the cool dampness of pit walls against skin, the metallic bite of blood in the air, the distant hoot of an owl, mocking the fallen. It wasn't impersonal. Each pit carried stories of the diggers and the doomed. A legionary like young Paulus, fresh from Rome's streets, might hesitate while setting stakes, recalling a childhood fall into a wealth terror of enclosure. Yet duty pressed. He smeared tips with dung to infect wounds, ensuring even survivors suffered slow, feverish ends. In one tale echoing through camps, a nervy chieftain tumbled into such a pit during the Battle of the Sabines, trapped but defiant. He hurled insults upward until a pylon silenced him, his body joining the stakes. Like a grotesque sculpture, these falls stripped warriors of dignity, reducing heroes to helpless prey. The earth's cruelty a mirror to war's indifference. Subscribe if you liked the video, and let's sink further into these timeless depths together. The pit's evolution brought even greater ingenuity, blending with other traps for compounded horror. In coastal marshes during the Veneti campaigns, Romans dug tidal pits shallow at low tide but flooding with the sea's rise, drowning the ensnared a rebel boatman, landing stealthily, steps into one, stakes graze his leg as water surges, the salt stinging wounds while he struggles against rising waves. No escape, only the gurgle of submersion under a starry sky. Inland, during the Ambiorix revolt, pits were baited, false trails leading to shiny Roman coins scattered as lures, drawing greedy raiders to their doom. Valerius, planting such a snare, might chuckle softly at the irony. Greeks fall as literal as the pit's drop. When a Ibroni warrior lunged for the gleam, the ground swallowed him, stakes ending his avarice in a flash of regret. Cruelty peaked in punitive expeditions, where pits served not just defense but retribution. After the Varus disaster in Teutoburg, though, later the memory influenced Gallic tactics. Romans responded with punishment pits in rebellious areas, left unmarked as warnings. Villagers whispered of ghosts in those holes, the echoes of falls lingering like curses. Yet, for the legionaries, digging was cathartic, a way to reclaim control from chaos. As evening fell, tools stowed, Valerius might gaze into a completed pit, the stakes shadowy sentinels, pondering how thin the line between trapper and trapped, as the darkness of these pits envelops us, leaving only the faint echo of earthbound screams. We emerge to consider the sharper siblings of stakes, puas and astekas, those silent weapons, lurking just below the surface, ready to strike without the drama of a fall. We'll unearth them next, where the ground's subtle pricks turned steps into agony, and silence was the deadliest weapon of all. Unearthing those spikes and stakes, now, where the ground's subtle pricks awaited like whispered threats beneath the surface. We rise from the pit's dark clutches to explore their sharper, more insidious silent sentinels that struck without the spectacle of a plunge, turning every footfall into a gamble with agony. Valerius, fresh from gazing into those earthen voids, often handled these weapons with a mix of reverence and dread, knowing their underground placement demanded precision, their cruelty lying in the quiet puncture that left no room for evasion. In the Gallic campaigns and beyond, by the mid-1st century before Christ, these caltrops, stimuli, and buried estakas became Rome's hidden arsenal, scattered like seeds of pain across fields and paths where the earth concealed barbs that bit deep, halting armies in their tracks with wounds as sudden as lightning. Envision a moonlit meadow on the fringes of a Gallic forest, the grass swaying gently in the breeze like a living carpet, as Valerius and his squad worked under the cover of stars. Their tools, sacks of iron caltrops, tetrahedral spikes forged in campfires, each arm about 10 centimeters long, designed so one point always faced upward no matter how they fell. Scattered liberally before the legion's lines, they lay invisible in the dukest turf. A charging Arverni warrior, his war paint stark in the pale light, steps heedlessly. The spike pierces his sandal, embedding in flesh with a sharp, unrelenting pressure. No dramatic fall, just a hobble, a gasp swallowed by the night, the pain radiating like fire, forcing him to drop shield and expose himself to a Roman arrow's flight. These crow's feet, as soldiers nicknamed them, were cheap to produce, easy to deploy, and devastating against cavalry. Horses reared in torment, unseating riders into further chaos, the ground turning from ally to adversary in an instant. Silent and underground, these weapons evolved from earlier republican experiments into staples of imperial warfare. During the social war in Italy around 90 before Christ, against allied tribes like the Marsi, Romans buried stakes in shallow furrows along mountain passes. Picture Valerius's forebears, legionaries under Sulla, embedding wooden estacast stakes whittled to razor tips and hardened in flames angled forward just below the soil. Camouflaged with loose dirt and pebbles, They awaited the barefooted insurgents who favored speed over armor. A Martian skirmisher, darting up the slope with spear in hand, feels the first prick, a stake gouging his instep, another slashing his calf as he stumbles forward. The wounds, though not fatal, bleed profusely, the dirt grinding into cuts to invite infection. No time to pull back. The pain disorients, turning a fluid advance into a limping retreat. Roman infantry closing in with grim efficiency. Sulla's reports, though sparse, hint at fields sown with iron thorns, where such spikes claimed more through debilitation than death. Deeper ingenuity came with the stimulant-branched stakes, resembling deer antlers, buried in clusters to entangle and maim. In Caesar's bridge over the Rhine in 55 before Christ, approaches were fortified with these underground horrors. Valerius, perhaps part of the construction crew, hammered them into the riverbank mud, points protruding just enough to snag but hidden by reeds and silt. Germanic horsemen, fording to harass the builders, found their mounts' legs caught in the branches. A twist, a snap of bone, and beast and rider floundered in the shallows. The water churned red, the spikes' silence broken only by splashes and neighs of panic. No warning, just the underground bite that crippled mobility. These were often poisoned with herbal extracts or feces, ensuring a slow fever if the initial wound spared life. A cruel extension of the trap's reach. Feel the subtlety of those deployments. The cool metal against palms as spikes were pressed into earth, the faint clink muffled by cloth wraps, the anticipation hanging like fog. It wasn't overt violence. It was the art of delay, of wearing down foes through accumulated hurts. A story circulated among the ranks of a clever auxiliary from Syria named Tariq, who during the British expeditions under Claudius in 43 after Christ adapted Eastern designs. He buried iron-faced curved spikes like scorpion tails in sandy dunes near Colchester. Iceni chariots, thundering across what seemed open ground, met disaster. Wheels snagged, axles splintered, drivers catapulted into waiting barbs. Tariq innovation, linking spikes with buried chains, so one puncture pulled others free, creating a chain reaction of underground mayhem. The beach echoed with crashes, the silent weapons revealing themselves in a symphony of destruction. No reaction possible beyond instinctive recoil. Subscribe if you like the video, and join the gentle flow of these historical currents. Yet these underground arms weren't limited to battle. They guarded roads and camps, a constant vigilance against spies and raiders. In the Dacian Wars under Trajan around 101 after Christ, miles of frontier paths were littered with such stakes. Valerius's successors, patrolling the Danube, scattered caltrops in high grass, their tetrahedrons glinting briefly in sunlight before burial. A Dacian infiltrator slinking through twilight, steps through the spike drives home, piercing boot and bone, his mission aborted in silent suffering. Trajan's column depicts such scenes indirectly. Fallen enemies clutching feet, a testament to the unseen warfare below ground. For the Romans, maintenance was key. Patrols retrieved and reused spikes, forging new ones from captured weapons, turning enemy iron against them in a cycle of quiet vengeance. The human stories behind these weapons added layers of poignancy. A young recruit, perhaps Paulus from earlier pits, might wince while planting stakes, recalling a childhood injury from a thorny vine that paralleled too close. Comrades shared remedies, salves of honey and herbs for puncture wounds, though many limped for life. Badges of survival. In one whispered anecdote from the Parthian borders, a centurion named Flavius rigged a field with stimuli during a retreat. Parthian cataphracts, armored knights on horseback, pursued relentlessly until the underground branches entangled mounts, heavy armor dragging riders down into a melee of spikes. Flavius watched from a ridge, the silence broken by distant whinnies, his trap claiming nobles without a single Roman casualty. Such victories built legends, where the ground itself fought for Rome. As we brush away the soil from these silent, underground warriors, revealing their pointed truth in the dim light of history, we see how they complemented the grander spectacles of war. But no theater matched the sieges, where traps like these scaled up to encompass entire cities. We'll scale those walls next, journeying to the sun-scorched shores of Carthage, where Punic ingenuity met Roman deception in a clash of empires, and traps wove into the very fabric of conquest. Scaling those sun-scorched walls now, where the underground spike's silent vigil gave way to the clamor of sieges that shook empires, we arrive at the shores of North Africa, where Roman deception wove into the fabric of conquest against a rival as cunning as any. The Punic Wars, spanning from 264 to 146 before Christ, transformed traps from battlefield subtleties into siege engines of despair. As legions clashed with Carthaginian ingenuity in battles that echoed across the Mediterranean, Valerius's descendants, hardened by Gallic forests and pits, would have marveled at the scale here. Entire cities encircled by webs of hazards, where the ground itself conspired against the besieged, no quarter given in the blistering heat that baked the sand into a golden haze. Picture the First Punic War's outset, around 260 before Christ, near the Sicilian city of Agrigento. a Carthaginian stronghold perched on cliffs like a defiant eagle. Roman consuls, learning from Italian campaigns, didn't assault blindly. They invested the town with a circumvallation of ditches and stakes, precursors to the grander horrors ahead. Legionaries, sweat streaming under tunics, dug wide fosse lined with buried spikes. Those attackers we unearthed earlier angled to impale scaling ladders or tumbling defenders. A Carthaginian sortie at dawn, warriors in linen armor charging with curved swords, met the trap, feet snagging on hidden caltrops, scattered like malicious stars, halting the rush mid-stride. One leader, perhaps Hanno's kin, hobbles forward only to plunge into a camouflaged pit, stakes claiming him in silence amid the clash of bronze. The Romans, from earthen ramparts, unleashed ballista bolts, turning retreat into rout the traps. Quiet work amplifying the siege's roar. As the wars intensified, traps evolved into psychological weapons, eroding will as much as walls. By the Second Punic War in 218 before Christ, Hannibal's shadow loomed large, but Romans countered with siegecraft honed against his allies. At the siege of Capua in 213 before Christ, after Hannibal's departure, Consul Appius Claudius encircled the opulent city with double lines, an inner vallum facing the walls, outer against relief. Between them lay a killing ground sown with underground peril stimuli, branches buried shallow, their prongs waiting like submerged crocodiles. Capuan defenders, desperate in the famine's grip, attempted night raids for supplies. A group slips over the walls on ropes, landing softly only for spikes to pierce souls, cries betraying positions to watchful sentries. No evasion possible. The pain's shockwave ripples through ranks, arrows finding marks in the moonlight. Livy's history's whisper of bodies left dangling as warnings, the traps claiming not just lives but hope. The pinnacle of Punic siege traps, unfolded at Carthage itself in the Third War, 149 to 146 before Christ, where Scipio Aemilianus orchestrated a masterpiece of encirclement. The city, a jewel of harbors and temples, was sealed by a massive wall and mole across the bay. But on land, the true deception lay in the earthworks. Legionaries under African sun that turned armor to ovens, constructed a contravallation stretching kilometers deep, ditches fronted by rows of lilia pits, interspersed with buried stakes and caltrops forged from captured Punic iron. Imagine a Carthaginian force, led by Hasdrubal, launching a counterattack at twilight, their elephants, painted for terror, lumbering forward. The ground, seemingly firm, erupts in hidden fury. Caltrops crippled massive feet, beasts trumpeting in agony, toppling into pits where stakes rend hides like paper. Riders catapulted, landing amid stimuli that slash and ensnare. No time to rise before Roman spearmen close. The chaos, dust swirling with blood's coppery scent, breaks the assault. Scipio's traps turning Hannibal's legacy against his own people. Feel the siege's rhythm, the distant thud of rams against gates, the acrid smoke of burning pitch, the low moans of the starving within walls that once echoed with merchants' calls. It wasn't all mechanical. Human stories threaded through. A Roman engineer, let's call him Sextus, descendant of earlier innovators, devised rolling traps for the approaches. Logs, studded with iron spikes, held by chains on slopes, released to barrel down on sorties. In one clash near the Bayersa citadel, Hasdrubal's elite guard advances under shield cover. Sextus signals the logs thunder forth, spikes gouging wood and flesh, splintering formations in a whirlwind of splinters and screams. Sextus, watching from a tower, feels a pang. War's cruelty mirrored in his creations, but duty steals him, as it did generations before. Subscribe if you liked the video, and let's keep weaving through these ancient sieges in peaceful reverie. Defenses countered with their own traps, a dance of mutual deception. The harbors hid underwater stakes, caissons of sharpened timbers sunk to rip. Roman hulls, while walls bristled with scorpion catapults triggered by pressure plates. Yet Romans adapted. Divers cleared paths at night, their breaths held in chill waves, while on land, they burrowed sap tunnels laced with collapsible sections to trap infiltrators. One night, Carthaginian sappers meet Roman counterparts underground. A rigged collapse buries them in dirt, the muffled thumps fading into silence. Scipio's innovation shown in the final assault, feigned attacks drawing defenders to one sector, while true breaches exploited weakened spots, traps clearing paths for the influx. The city fell in flames, but not before traps claimed thousands. The ground soaked in Punic and Roman blood alike. These sieges' legacy lingered in Roman doctrine, influencing later conquests. Polybius details the engineering ramparts with integrated spikes, ditches flooded for added peril, lessons carried to Spain and Greece. A tale from the ranks speaks of a Punic slave turned Roman auxiliary who revealed hidden pitfalls, buried urns of quicklime that burst on impact, burning skin with caustic fury. Neutralized by careful probing, they became Roman tools, repurposed against holdouts. The human cost mounted widows in Rome, mourning sons lost to unseen barbs, while in Carthage, the enslaved whispered of vengeful spirits in the ruins, as the smoke clears from Carthage's pyre, casting long shadows over a conquered sea. We see how traps in these Punic struggles bridged eras from republican grit to imperial dominance. But no figure embodied this ingenuity like Julius Caesar, whose strategies elevated deception to art. We'll march with him next, through conquests where traps intertwined with genius, turning landscapes into extensions of his unyielding will. Marching with Julius Caesar now, through landscapes where the siege traps of Carthage faded into the mists of memory, only to resurface in bolder forms under his unyielding gaze. We traverse the rugged paths of Gaul and beyond, where in conquest turned every river, hill, and plain into a canvas of calculated peril. Caesar, the master strategist whose commentaries read like whispers from the past, elevated those underground spikes and pits into symphonies of deception, weaving them into campaigns that expanded Rome's grasp with relentless precision. Our enduring legionary thread might have served under him directly. His spade as vital as his sword in battles where traps anticipated every enemy move, leaving foes no breath to counter before the ground or the plan claimed them in vision. The misty banks of the Rhine in 55 before Christ, where Caesar's audacious bridge spanned the wide waters like a defiant thread, but the true genius lay in the defenses that guarded its approaches. Legionaries under the general's keen eye didn't merely build, they deceived. Shallow fords nearby were laced with submerged stakes as stackers driven deep into the riverbed, their tips just below the surface, hidden by the rippling current. Germanic tribes, emboldened by their forested homelands, attempted crossings at dusk, waiting with axes raised. A warrior's foot strikes wood, the spike impaling through boot and bone, the cold water turning warm with blood. No splash of warning, just the silent underwater snare that hobbled advances, allowing Roman catapults on the far bank to rain stones like hail. Caesar's strategy here was holistic: the bridge allure, the traps, the hook, drawing enemies into chaos while his forces crossed unmolested, the river's murmur masking the muffled cries. This ingenuity wasn't impulsive. It built on Punic lessons, adapting siege traps to mobile warfare. In the Gallic War's early days, around 58 before Christ at the Battle of the Ar, Caesar feigned retreat to entice the Helvetii across the river only for prepared ground on the Roman side to bristle with buried caltrops and stimuli. Picture Valerius scattering them at dawn, the iron cool in his palm, pressed into soft earth disguised by trampled grass. The migrating tribe, wagons creaking behind warriors, charges forth. Horses falter first, spikes piercing hooves with cruel punctures, riders tumbling into branched stakes that slash and ensnare. The advance dissolves into pandemonium screams blending with the river's rushes. Caesar's legions wheel about, their disciplined ranks closing like jaws. His commentaries note the efficiency: minimal losses, maximum disruption. Traps, turning migration into massacre without a full clash. Deeper into Gaul, Caesar's strategies layered traps with psychological warfare, eroding tribal unity. At the siege of the Aduatuci stronghold in 57 before Christ, he encircled the hillfort with a 15-mile contravallation, echoing Scipio's at Carthage but amplified. Ditches yawned wide, fronted by rows of lilia pits and underground spikes, while towers housed ballistae triggered by hidden mechanisms. Aduatuci defenders, peering from timber walls, launched sorties under starlight. One group creeps forward, evading patrols only to step into a field of stimuli. Branches snagging legs like thorny vines, no escape as pain flares. Caesar, ever the observer, used such moments to parley, offering mercy that masked further deception. False weak points in the lines, baited with apparent gaps but ringed by concealed pits. When the tribe surrendered, selling kin into slavery to buy peace, it was Trap's unseen threat that broke their spirit. The ground a silent ally in conquest. Feel the pulse of those campaigns, the acrid smoke of campfires drifting over Duke fields, the metallic ring of hammers forging spikes, the low hum of soldiers reciting Caesar's orders like mantras. It wasn't detached command. Caesar walked among them, sharing rations of grain and wine, his presence inspiring feats like the double fortification at Alesia in 52 before Christ. Here, ingenuity peaked in inner circumvallation, trapped Vercingetorix's 80,000 Gauls, and out it faced 250,000 reinforcements, both laced with a deadly tapestry of traps. Valerius, laboring through rainy nights, helped embed iron hooks in log cypress barriers that rolled down slopes and scattered caltrops in the valleys between. Gallic relief forces, thundering in waves, met the outer line, feet mangled charges, broken pits swallowing the bold. One chieftain, armor gleaming, urges his men onward only for a hook to snag his shield, dragging him into stakes where silence claims him swiftly. Caesar's genius lay in anticipation. Supplies cut, morale shattered, traps ensuring every assault ended in futility. The hills echoing with despair. Subscribe if you liked the video, and let's march onward through these strategic whispers of your yet. Caesar's conquests extended beyond Gaul, his strategies influencing civil wars where traps turned brother against brother. In Spain at Ilerda in 49 before Christ, against Pompey's lieutenants, He dammed rivers to flood enemy camps but wove in underwater snares, spiked chains submerged in fords, entangling swimmers desperate for water. A Pompeian scout, plunging in at noon, feels the chain wrap cold and unyielding, spikes biting deep as currents pull him under. No surface struggle visible, just a ripple, then stillness. The trap's ingenuity preserving Caesar's forces for the decisive push. His crossing of the Rubicon earlier that year symbolized boldness, but it was such deceptions that secured victory. Traps masking vulnerabilities in lightning campaigns. Human elements soften the strategy's edge. Caesar's clemency, sparing foes to swell his ranks, contrasted the trap's mercilessness. A tale from the ranks speaks of a centurion named Antonius who, during the African campaign in 46 before Christ against Scipio's remnants, rigged a desert oasis with buried fass around the waterhole. Thirsty Numidians, drawn by the gleam, approach. Warily but spikes claim mounts and men, turning relief into rout. Antonius, reflecting by firelight, pondered the irony. Water life-giver turned deadly by Roman wit. Caesar praised such innovations, incorporating them into his legion's doctrine, where every soldier learned to see terrain as trap potential. As the sun sets on Caesar's conquests, casting golden hues over bloodied fields where ingenuity forged an empire, we appreciate how his strategies bridged republican wars to imperial horizons. Traps under him weren't mere obstacles, they were extensions of will, anticipating reactions that never came. But some deceptions flowed with water itself, rivers and seas hiding perils beneath waves. We'll navigate those aquatic defenses next, where Roman traps met the fluid unpredictability of water, and surprises lurked in every current and tide. Navigating those aquatic defenses now, where the fluid unpredictability of rivers and seas concealed surprises as cunning as Caesar's landbound strategies. We glide along the currents that bordered Rome's ambitions, from the swirling Rhine to the azure Mediterranean where water became both barrier and betrayer. The traps here, evolving from the spiked grounds and sieges of old, turned waves into weapons, their hidden perils striking with the swiftness of a riptide, leaving invaders no moment to gasp before submersion claimed them. Valerius, our legionary companion through forests and fields, might have waded these waters with a mix of awe and wariness, his engineering skills adapting to the ebb and flow, crafting snares that blended seamlessly with the liquid landscape, under commanders who saw every ford and harbor as an opportunity for unseen ambush. Picture the turbulent Rhine once more. In 38 before Christ, under Agrippa's campaigns against the Ubi tribes, where Roman ingenuity met the river's relentless push, legionaries' boots sinking into muddy banks didn't rely on bridges alone. They submerged chains of iron spikes long as stackers, linked like underwater serpents anchored to the bed with weighted stones, camouflaged by silt and reeds swaying in the current. These awaited Germanic raiders crossing at low tide. A bold warrior, his fur cloak heavy with water, fords confidently, axe slung over his shoulder. His leg brushes the chain, spikes hooking flesh and pulling him under as the flow intensifies. No surface ripple betrays the trap, just a brief thrash, then silence. The river carrying away the evidence, while Roman archers on the opposite shore loose arrows at the disorganized followers. Agrippa, Caesar's heir in spirit, praised such defenses for their economy, minimal manpower, maximal disruption, turning natural forces into Roman allies. These aquatic traps weren't novel inventions but refinements of Punic naval deceptions, scaled to rivers and coasts. During the Illyrian Wars around 229 before Christ, against pirate queens like Tuta, Romans fortified Adriatic harbors with underwater barriers, caissons of sharpened timbers sunk in grids, their points jutting just below the waves. Imagine a pirate galley, oars dipping rhythmically under a starry sky, approaching what seems an open anchorage. The hull grinds against hidden stakes, wood splintering with a crack like thunder, seawater rushing in through gashes. Crewmen leap overboard, only to find caltrops scattered on the shallow seabed, piercing feet in the dark depths. No time to seal breaches. The ship lists, sinking swiftly as Roman triremes emerge from coves, rams gleaming. Polybius recounts similar tactics at Lilybaeum in Sicily during the First Punic War, where submerged spikes protected anchorages, forcing Carthaginian fleets to hesitate, their momentum lost to the sea's hidden fangs. Deeper into maritime warfare, traps integrated with engineering marvels like Caesar's Venetian campaign in 56 before Christ against the seafaring Their tall ships, built for Atlantic swells, outmaneuvered Roman galleys in open water, but Caesar countered with coastal ambushes. Legionaries constructed floating platforms, rafts disguised as debris, laden with submerged hooks and nets weighted by stones, drifting with tides. These lured Veneti vessels close. A grappling iron launches from shore catapults, snagging sails while underwater nets entangle rudders. A Veneti captain, barking orders amid salt spray, feels the ship shut, rising like krakens, spikes embedded in hulls tearing planks asunder. Panic spreads, oars fouling in the mesh, no evasion possible before Roman boarding parties swarm. Caesar's victory here stemmed from adaptation, traps that moved with the sea, turning mobility against the mobile. the waves whispering of impending doom. Feel the sway of those waters, the cool spray misting faces, the creak of timber under strain, the distant call of gulls masking the clink of submerged iron. It wasn't impersonal. Sailors and soldiers shared tales of narrow escapes, like a quinkering navigator spotting a suspicious eddy just in time, steering clear of a spiked caisson. Yet, underlying the peril was human resilience. Medics on shore, treating puncture wounds with herbal poultices, while engineers refined designs, adding barbs smeared in resin for better gripping currents. In one anecdote from the Actium campaign in 31 before Christ, under Octavian, later Augustus, Antony's fleet faced underwater perils in the Ambracian Gulf. Roman divers, breath held in lung-burning dives, planted spiked logs in shallows. Antony's ships, maneuvering for battle, ground against them, holes holed in the melee. Cleopatra's escape through the chaos highlighted the trap's role, delaying enough for Octavian's lighter vessels to close, the sea's surface calm belying the turmoil below. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's sail further into these watery echoes of history together. Aquatic defenses reached imperial sophistication in the Dacian Wars under Trajan around 101 after Christ, where the Danube's broad expanse demanded innovation. Trajan's column depicts pontoon bridges, but unseen were the riverine traps, floating mines of sword barrels filled with spikes and pitch, chained underwater and released by currents toward enemy fleets. Dacian boats, laden with archers, drift into range. A barrel surfaces briefly, colliding with a hull, spikes puncturing as pitch ignites from friction or torches. Flames leap, water boiling around the stricken craft, no quenching the blaze before it spreads. Trajan's engineers, drawing from Caesarean precedents, also dammed tributaries to create artificial rapids laced with sunken stakes, funneling Dacian crossings into kill zones. A warlord, urging his men across foaming waters, watches his vanguard vanish, stakes impaling, currents dragging bodies downstream in a froth of red. The river's roar drowned cries, traps ensuring Roman dominance without full engagement. Not all were offensive. Defensive aquatic traps guarded Rome's frontiers. In Britain under Agricola in 78 after Christ, Caledonian incursions met tidal marshes rigged with submerged caltrops and pits that filled with the incoming sea. Tribesmen, waiting at low tide to raid camps, found the ground treacherous, spikes mangling feet as water rose, turning retreat into drowning desperation. Agricola's reports, though lost, inspire tales of ghostly marshes where unwary vanished. The traps silence a perpetual guardian. Valerius's kin, stationed there, might have maintained these by moonlight, chains rattling softly against anchors, pondering the sea's vast indifference. Coastal sieges amplified these, like at Massilia in 49 before Christ during Caesar's civil war. The harbor, loyal to Pompey, was blockaded with sunken ships forming barriers, holes deliberately holed and positioned with protruding rams as underwater spikes. Massilian vessels attempting breakout rammed these ghosts, timbers cracking. No maneuver room in the confined bay. Caesar's fleet, waiting beyond, pounced on the crippled, turning the sea into a graveyard of masts. The ingenuity lay in recycling. Enemy captures repurposed as traps, economy and conquest. As the tides recede from these aquatic realms, revealing sands etched with the ghosts of sunken perils, we see how Roman traps conquered not just land but the very elements, from rivers' swift currents to seas' endless horizons. They anticipated every splash, every wave. But such defenses paled beside the fortresses that rose like titans, their walls hiding surprises that made them truly impregnable. We'll ascend those battlements next, where stone and cunning intertwined, and every breach invited doom. Ascending those battlements now, where stone and cunning intertwined, to form bastions that rose like eternal sentinels from the earth. We leave the watery depths behind and climb the ramparts of Rome's most formidable fortresses, places where aquatic traps gave way to elevated deceptions that guarded the empire's heart. These walls, built upon the foundations of Caesarean strategies and Punic sieges, hid surprises within their very mortar, turning every attempted breach into a cascade of unforeseen peril. Valerius, our steadfast guide through rivers and fields, would have patrolled these heights with a vigilant eye, knowing that the true strength lay not in height alone, but in the hidden mechanisms that struck without prelude, leaving assailants no instant to reconsider their folly amid the dust of crumbling stone. Envision the windswept heights of Masada in Judea, around 73 after Christ during the Jewish revolt, where Flavius Silva's legions besieged the cliff fortress held by zealots. The Romans didn't assault blindly. They constructed a massive ramp of earth and timber, but wove surprises into the walls they raised around the base. Concealed within the circumvallation were spring-loaded ports, in the stone hiding ballistae triggered by pressure plates buried in approach paths. A zealot raider, descending ropes under cover of night, treads the plate. A mechanism clicks softly, unleashing a bolt that pierces the darkness, impaling him mid-stride. No warning groan from the walls, just the whisper of release, the thud of impact echoing off the cliffs as his body tumbles into the void below. Silva's engineers, drawing from Trajan's aquatic innovations, integrated water channels into the walls, hidden aqueducts that could flood ditches at a lever's pull, turning dry moats into swirling traps laced with submerged spikes, drowning and maiming in one fluid motion. These impregnable designs weren't born in isolation. They echoed the early Republican forts, scaled to imperial grandeur in the limes of Germania, like at Solberg around 90 after Christ under Domitian. Frontier walls bristled with surprises that blended stone with subtlety. Legionaries like Villiers constructed turrets with false floors, platforms over pits disguised as solid walkways, rigged to collapse under enemy weight during Picture a Germanic tribesman, ladder propped against the wall, scrambling up with war cry rising. He crests the parapet, steps forward, the floor gives way, plunging him into stakes below, cries cut short by the fool's cruelty. The walls themselves hid caltrops in crevices, scattered by shoots during assaults, raining iron thorns onto climbers clustered at the base. Domitian's doctrine emphasized layered defenses, outer abatis of spiked branches leading to walls with embedded iron hooks, snagging shields and limbs as foes pressed close. No respite in the press of bodies. Deeper ingenuity lay in the mechanical marvels like the cherubalistry hand-cranked repeaters concealed in war niches, fed by gravity chutes of bolts. At the siege of Jotapata in 67 after Christ, Vespasian's forces against Josephus's defenders employed such surprises. The walls around the Galilean town featured rotating sections, segments on pivots that could swing open, revealing spiked rams swung by chains to sweep ladders clear. A Jewish warrior, bold in the moonlight, leads a sortie. The wall shifts with a grind of stone, the ram whipping out to crush ribs and hurl him back into his comrades. Vespasian, ever practical, added psychological twists, dummies on battle to draw fire, while real archers lurked in hidden embrasures, arrows finding marks through slits that offered no reciprocal view. Josephus's own accounts, surrendered in defeat, detailed the despair, the walls seeming alive, surprises eroding resolve as surely as starvation. Feel the solidity underfoot, the rough texture of quarried stone warmed by sun, the distant clang of hammers echoing like heartbeats, the faint scent of pitch ceiling joints against weather and foe. It wasn't mere masonry. It was a living entity, surprises breathing life into inert rock. Soldiers shared quiet moments atop these walls, Valerius perhaps gazing at horizons, pondering home while oiling a trap's hinge, the mechanism's smooth click a comfort in uncertain times. Yet, underlying the odd was the toll. Masons crushed by falling blocks during construction, guards lost to nocturnal slips into their own pits. A whispered story from the Danubian forts tells of an auxiliary named Brennus, who devised wall scythes, blades, and arms triggered by tripwires along the base. During a Sarmatian raid, the wires snap, blades arcing down to reap legs like wheat, the silence broken by wet thuds and howls. Brennus's pride turned somber as he bandaged survivors. The surprise's impartiality a grim reminder. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's continue scaling these historical heights in serene contemplation. Fortresses like Hadrian's Wall in Britannia, completed around 122 after Christ, epitomized this evolution, stretching like a stone serpent across misty moors. Mild castles dotted the line, each with surprises, gates rigged with portcullises that dropped unannounced, spiked grills impaling chargers mid-gallop. Hidden sallyports allowed Roman sorties, but led enemies into enclosed courtyards ringed by lilia pits if pursued. Pictish warriors, painted blue and fierce, probe a seeming breach at dusk. The port swings shut behind, pits claiming the trapped as archers fire from above. Hadrian's Wall wasn't just barrier. It was ecosystem of deception, integrated with signal towers that flashed warnings, coordinating surprises across miles. Agricola's earlier campaigns influenced these, blending aquatic river defenses with elevated walls, creating a seamless shield where land and structure conspired on in the east. Against Parthian horsemen, fortresses like Duryopos around 165 after Christ under Marcus Aurelius featured undermined walls, tunnels ready to collapse sections onto besiegers. Sappers dug countermines laced with spikes, flooding them with naphtha that ignited on contact. A Parthian tunneler, torch flickering in stale air, breaks through. Spikes greet him first, then flames erupt, the underground roar collapsing the breach above. Marcus's meditations reflect on such ingenuity, war's necessities tempered by philosophy, but the surprises saved lives, turning assaults into legionaries maintained these with ritual care, polishing brass fittings on trapdoors, ensuring the click of engagement remained swift and silent. As twilight drapes these impregnable walls, shadows lengthening like fingers over that hid so many secrets, we reflect on the fortress's dual nature, protectors and prisons. Their surprise is a blend of genius and grief. From stone heights to the human depths below, the stories of those who fell to these traps beckon tales of pain and perseverance that humanize the cold calculus of war. We'll descend into those personal echoes next, where the clash of empires met the quiet suffering of individuals, and every trap's snap carried a name and a story. Descending into those personal echoes now, Where the clash of empires met the quiet suffering of individuals trapped within the fortress's unyielding stone, we linger on the human stories that breathed life and often took atom at the surprises, hidden in walls and earth, the pain of the fallen, etched in the memories of survivors like Valerius patrolling distant battlements, reminds us that every snap of a trap carried not just strategy but a name, a family, and a final breath stolen. In an instant, from the heights of Hadrian's Wall to the sun-baked ramparts of Judea, these tales humanized the machinery of war, turning abstract deceptions into intimate tragedies that whispered through the ages, their sorrow as enduring as the stones themselves. Picture a young Germanic auxiliary named Alaric, enlisted under duress during the Marcomannic Wars around 170 after Christ under Marcus Aurelius, stationed at a Danubian fortress, its walls laced with those pivoting scythes we ascended earlier. Alaric's duty was simple: maintain the mechanisms, oiled the hinges to ensure silent operation. But one foggy dawn, as Quadi raiders scaled the walls, with grapples clinking softly against mortar, Alaric hesitated, a flicker of kinship for the tribesman who resembled his kin. The tripwire triggered late, a blade swung, catching not the enemy but a fellow Roman scrambling to reinforce. The man, a grizzled veteran from Hispania named Rufus, gasped as the scythe sliced deep across his chest, blood blooming like dark roses on his tunic. Rufus's eyes met Alaric's in that frozen moment, no accusation, just shocked before he slumped against the parapet, his last whisper a plea for his distant wife. The pain wasn't just physical, it rippled through the garrison, Alaric haunted by guilt, the fortress's surprise turning inward like a self-inflicted wound. These stories weren't rare, they wove through every layer of Roman defense, where traps and partiality spared no one. In the shadowed alleys of Dura Europos during the Sassanid siege around 256 after Christ, a Syrian archer named Miriam. Women often served in auxiliary roles, guarded a hidden sally port rigged with collapsing floors. Her brother, a sapper named Elias, had helped build it, laughing as they tested the mechanism with sandbags. But when Persian infiltrators breached at midnight, the floor gave way as planned, plunging them into spiked pits below. Elias, rushing to aid, misstepped in the chaos. The ground swallowed him too, stakes piercing his side with a wet crunch that Miriam heard over the clash of swords. She pulled him free, his blood warm on her hands, but infection claimed him days later, fevered, dreams murmuring of homes, olive groves. The pain of the fallen extended beyond the instant, lingering in fevered brows, in widows' letters unread, in the quiet sobs echoing off fortress walls that offered no comfort. Deeper still, the fallen's tales crossed enemy lines, humanizing foes in the Romans' eyes. During the Jewish revolt at Bether in 135 after Christ, under Hadrian's merciless campaign, a zealot fighter named Baruch led a desperate sortie against Roman walls studded with those gravity-fed caltrop shoots. The surprises rained down, iron thorns embedding in feet and thighs. But Baruch pressed on, driven by visions of his family's safety within the besieged town. A caltrop caught his sandal, the spike driving deep into bone. He fell, exposed to a ballista bolt that grazed his arm, pain exploding like fire. Captured alive, he whispered to his Roman interrogator, centurion weary of endless sieges, of his daughter's laughter, a plea for mercy that softened the man's resolve. Though Baruch perished in the pits, his story spread among the legion, a reminder that traps claimed not monsters, but men with hearts as fragile as any. The centurion, perhaps echoing Valerius's reflections, pondered by campfire light how such deceptions severed shared humanity, the pain a bridge across divides. Feel the weight of those moments, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the dust of ancient stone, the distant wail of wind through embrasures like mournful laments, the soft rustle of bandages applied in dim torchlight. It wasn't all despair. Glimmers of compassion emerged, like medics braving surprises to retrieve the wounded, their hands steady amid chaos. A story from the British frontiers tells of a Pictish scout ensnared in a Mile castle's portcullis during a raid on Hadrian's Wall. The grill dropped, spikes grazing his leg, pain shooting like lightning as he dangled helpless. A Roman guard, a local Briton named Calin, cut him free instead of finishing him, moved by the scout's defiant gaze that mirrored his own tribal past. The Pict fled, limping into the mists, but the act spared further pain, a quiet rebellion against the fortress's cold logic. Such mercies were rare, yet they humanized the fallen, turning traps victims into echoes of shared frailty. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's hold space for these poignant threads in our tranquil exploration. Yet the pain often stemmed from the trap's evolution, where innovation amplified suffering. In the eastern deserts at Hatra around 198 after Christ, under Septimius Severus, Parthian defenders mirrored Roman surprises with naphtha-filled pots hurled from walls, igniting on impact amid spiked barriers. A Roman assailant, scaling with testudo shields interlocked, feels the heat first, flames seeping through cracks, burning skin as spikes below claim those who fall. One soldier, a young recruit from Gaul named Lucan, survived the blaze but lost an eye to a splintered stake, his screams blending with the crackle of fire. Back in camp, he shared his tale with comrades, the pain etching lines on his face prematurely, a living testament to the human cost of ever deadlier deceptions. Severus's legions prevailed, but victories tasted bitter, laced with the fallen's unspoken accusations. These stories extended to civilians caught in the crossfire, their pain a collateral shadow. During the siege of Byzantium in 196 after Christ, as Severus consolidated power, local fishermen navigating the Bosphorus snagged on submerged aquatic traps spiked chains meant for enemy ships. A father and son, hauling nets at dawn, feel the boat lurch, spikes tear the hull, water surging as they cling to wreckage. The son, barely a teen, drowns in the currents, his father's grief howling over the waves of pain not of battle but of indifference. The fortresses reached extending into innocent lives. Romans, hearing the tale, paused in their duties, a momentary hush acknowledging the trap's blind cruelty. As the echoes of these human stories fade into the night, like whispers carried on fortress winds, we honor the pain of the fallen not as footnotes, but as the heart of history's narrative. Their suffering fueled the empire's drive for better defenses, leading to innovations that refined traps into even more sophisticated forms. We'll trace those evolutions next, where Roman ingenuity pushed boundaries, transforming simple snares into imperial marvels that guarded a vast realm. Tracing those evolutions now, where the human stories of pain and loss fueled a relentless drive for refinement, we follow the arc of Roman ingenuity as it pushed the boundaries of deception, transforming simple snares into imperial marvels that safeguarded a realm stretching from misty Britannia to sun-drenched Sur. The evolution of traps, born from the fallen silent lessons etched in fortress stones and soldiers' scars, saw engineers blending old wisdom with new mechanics, creating defenses that anticipated threats with eerie precision, leaving enemies no flicker of time to adapt before the mechanisms unfolded their deadly grace. Valerius's lineage, those weary guardians of walls and whispers, would have witnessed this progression firsthand, their tools evolving from crude spades to intricate gears, each innovation a tribute to the pain that demanded better ways to prevent it. By the height of the empire under Trajan around 101 after Christ, traps had matured into integrated systems, no longer isolated perils but symphonies of interconnected hazards. In the Dacian campaigns, where forested hills echoed with barbaric war cries, Roman engineers introduced the tormentum torsion-powered devices hidden in earthworks, evolving from Caesar's ballistae into automated sentinels. Picture a legionary, like young Gaius, a tinkerer's son from Ostia, calibrating one such innovation, a buried torsion spring connected to a net of spiked chains, triggered by seismic plates sensitive to marching feet. Dacian warriors, adorned in falx blades that glinted like crescent moons, advanced through a seemingly open valley. The ground trembles faintly, the spring uncoils with a subterranean hum, flinging the net upward to entangle and maim. Limbs snared, blades useless in the mesh, the pain instant as spikes bite. Deep no evasion, just the collective gasp of a formation shattered. Trajan's columns depict these triumphs, but omit the nights Gaius spent refining the plates, his fingers raw from wire, driven by memories of comrades lost to earlier cruder traps. This evolution wasn't stagnant, it flowed with the empire's expansion, incorporating conquered knowledge into Roman arsenals. In the east, after subduing the Nabateans around 106 after Christ, engineers absorbed Arabian hydraulics, evolving aquatic traps into self-sustaining marvels. At Petra's rose-red cliffs, Roman garrisons fortified wadis with dammed channels rigged to release flash floods laced with floating spikes, buoyant caltrops carved from lightweight cork and iron, a Bedouin raider scouting under a starlit sky. Hears the distant rumble too late. Gates creak open upstream, water surging like a living beast, carrying thorns that puncture skin amid the torrent's roar. Drowned or wounded, survivors crawl ashore only to trigger secondary pits. The evolution, seamless water to earth, one trap birthing another. Gaius, perhaps reassigned here, marveled at the fusion Habatian ingenuity twisted to Roman ends. The pain of adaptation a quiet undercurrent in his journal sketches. Deeper innovations emerged in the urban fortresses, where traps guarded not just borders but the empire's core. Under Hadrian's reign around 117 after Christ, the Pantheon in Rome itself concealed subtle defenses, evolving from siege surprises to civic safeguards against unrest. Hidden beneath mosaic floors lay pressure-sensitive vaults, connected to ceiling chutes that could dispense heated sand or oil precursors to later Byzantine Greek fire. During the rare urban riots, a mob pressing into a forum might trigger one. Tiles shift imperceptibly, scalding grains cascading down like infernal rain, burning exposed skin without flame's telltale glow. No grand spectacle, just sudden agony, dispersing the crowd. The innovation's elegance in its discretion. A Praetorian guard named Lucius, tasked with maintenance, tested these in secret drills. The sizzle of sand on dummy flesh, a grim reminder of the fallen's legacy. Each refinement sparing Roman lives at the cost of others' suffering. Feel the progression in those workshops. The acrid smoke of forges blending with the scent of oiled leather. the rhythmic clank of hammers shaping bronze gears, the low murmurs of inventors debating torque and tension. It wasn't cold calculation. Human passion drove it, engineers like Gaius pouring grief into creation. A tale from the Rhine limes around 150 after Christ speaks of a Batavian auxiliary, Eburon, who lost a brother to a faulty pit in earlier wars. Vowing improvement, he devised the Eburon's web, a lattice of underground wires linked to surface caltrops, evolving simple spikes into a responsive network that vibrated alerts to distant towers. When Swabian invaders tread the field wires, caltrops pop free in waves, puncturing boots and hooves in synchronized fury. Eburon's innovation saved his cohort, but the pain of his loss lingered, etched in every taut strand of personal evolution, mirroring the empires. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's evolve together through these innovative layers of the past. Yet mechanical marvels peaked under Severus Alexander around 230 after Christ, as threats from Sassanids loomed. In Mesopotamian outposts, traps incorporated clockwork from Hellenistic influences, evolving into timed mechanisms. Buried catapults wound by water clocks, releasing boulders at predetermined intervals during sieges. Persian scouts, probing defenses. At twilight, hear a faint tick do subtle to alarm for a spring unleashes. Stones hurtling from concealed embrasures to crush helms and hopes. No human hand pulls the trigger. The evolution to autonomy, where traps thought via gears, and gravity anticipated moves with mechanical pressions. Gaius's successors tested these in arid sands. The whir of unwinding springs, a lullaby of progress, though malfunctions claimed allies too. The pain of innovation's double edge. Chemical evolutions added insidious layers, drawing from alchemical experiments in Alexandria. By the late empire under Diocletian around 290 after Christ, traps featured caustic lime pits that reacted with water to burn flesh, evolving drowning hazards into corrosive nightmares. At the Persian frontier, such pits ringed forts. A spy splashing through a shallow ford activates the mix. Lime bubbling fiercely, skin blistering in clouds of steam. The screams, raw and unrelenting, deter others. The innovation's cruelty a deterrent born from endless border skirmishes. Engineers masked these with illusory covers, thin crusts of dyed earth blending deception with destruction. Each advancement a step toward the Byzantine complexities that would follow. Rome's fall. Social innovations complemented the mechanical, with traps integrated into legionary training, evolving from ad hoc digs to standardized manuals like Vegetus's De Re Militari around 390 after Christ. Soldiers learned to deploy ghost fields, illusory terrains of painted canvas hiding spikes, fooling eyes from afar. In one drill turned real during Gothic incursions, of exhalation sets such a field. Invaders charge, canvas yielding to reveal a stacker's pain flaring as illusions shatter. Vegetius emphasized the human element, traps as morale boosters, sparing the fallen by preventing battles altogether. As the sun dips on this era of innovation, casting amber light over workshops where gears turn like the wheels of fate, we see how evolution wove pain into progress, each trap a scar healed into strength. From torsion springs to chemical caustics, Roman cunning adapted, anticipating empire's clashes. But nowhere was this tested more than in the sun-baked battles of the Orient, where deceptions met the wily Parthians, and traps danced with horsemen's shadows across endless plains. We'll ride into those eastern skirmishes next, where Roman ingenuity faced its mirror in cunning foes, and every dune hid a potential grave. Riding into those eastern skirmishes now, where Roman ingenuity faced its mirror in the cunning of Parthian horsemen across endless plains dotted with shimmering mirages, we chased the shadows of battles that tested the empire's evolving traps. Like never before, their deceptions dancing amid the dust storms that veiled both triumph and tragedy. The innovations forged in workshops and frontiers, tempered by the pain of the fallen, found their ultimate proving ground here, against an enemy whose mobility matched Rome's meticulous planning, leaving no room for error as arrows whistled like vengeful winds. Valerius's distant kin, those sun-hardened legionaries stationed along the Euphrates, would have squinted against the glare, knowing each dune could hide a grave. Their traps evolving in real time to counter the elusive Parthians who struck and faded like ghosts in the heat haze. Envision the arid expanses near Carrhae in 53 before Christ, where Crassus's legions met catastrophe, but not before Roman deceptions attempted to turn the tide against Serenus' mounted archers. The Parthians, masters of feigned retreat, lured Romans into open ground, but Crassus's engineers had scattered caltrops, those evolved iron thorns from earlier innovations, cross anticipated paths, buried shallow in the sand. A Parthian, armored like a living statue, charges in mock flight reversed, his horse steps true, the spike embedding deep in hoof, beast rearing with a piercing neigh that shatters the illusion. Rider unseated, exposed to Roman pila hurling through the air, the deception flips Parthian momentum halted in an instant of underground betrayal. Yet, the battle's infamy stems from Roman hubris. Traps claimed some, but endless arrows claimed more. Crassus's head paraded as a trophy. a grim lesson that spurred further evolution against such foes. This setback ignited a fire of adaptation, where deceptions grew more intricate to match Parthian guile. By Antony's campaign in 36 before Christ, traps incorporated Oriental influence as spies from allied kingdoms sharing secrets of spiked camel pits, wide excavations disguised with tent fabrics mimicking dunes. Legionaries like our imagined Quintus, a veteran of Gallic rivers now baking under Armenian suns, dug these under moonlight, lining bottoms with fire-hardened esticas smeared in scorpion venom for lingering agony. Parthian scouts, probing camp perimeters at dawn, tumble in. The fabric yields like a treacherous veil, stakes puncturing as venom courses through veins, no cry escaping before paralysis sets in. Antony's forces, though ultimately repelled by attrition, used such pits to bleed the enemy, deceptions evolving into attrition tools that wore down horse lords who prized speed over siege. Deeper clashes under Trajan in 114 after Christ saw Roman innovations shine against Osroes's Parthians, where the Euphrates became a frontier of fluid traps blending aquatic and desert elements. Trajan's engineers constructed floating barriers, rafts of spiked logs chained across bends, camouflaged as driftwood by reeds and mud. Parthian galleys, ferrying archers downstream, collide in the current. Timbers, splinter hulls, spikes rending wood and flesh as water rushes in. Crews flail, entangled in the wreckage, no time to loose arrows before drowning or Roman ballistae from shore find their marks. Quintus, perhaps commanding a turret, watches the river turn red. The deceptions, success a bomb against memories of Caer's ghosts. Trajan's conquest of Mesopotamia owed much to these traps that anticipated riverine raids, evolving from Caesar's Rhine crossings into hybrid marvels that claimed Parthian nobility midstream. Feel the harsh breath of the desert, the gritty sand between teeth, the relentless sun-baking leather armor, the distant thunder of hooves that could herald ally or ambush. It wasn't abstract warfare. Personal vendettas fueled the deceptions, legionaries avenging fallen comrades with ever cleverer snares. A whispered legend from the ranks tells of a Cappadocian auxiliary named Aram, whose family perished in Parthian raids. He devised whispering dunes, hollowed mounds rigged with torsion wires connected to buried horns that amplified vibrations, alerting to approaching cavalry. When triggered, secondary traps unleashed rolling boulders studded with spikes tumbling down slopes. In one skirmish near Nisibis, Parthian horsemen crest a rise. The dunes whisper their coming, boulders cascade, crushing mounts and men in a roar of dust and despair. Aram's innovation, born of pain, evolved Roman defenses into proactive sentinels. The Orient's vastness tamed by cunning echoes. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's ride further into these sunlit deceptions together. Yet, Parthian countermeasures forced continual evolution, their own traps mirroring Rome's poisoned wells and feigned oases laced with buried barbs. Under Severus in 197 after Christ, Romans responded with chemical deceptions from Diocletian's precursors, lime-dusted fields that, when disturbed by hooves, billowed caustic clouds, blinding eyes and burning lungs. Parthian cataphracts, charging through what seemed harmless powder, inhaled the haze. Vision blurs, coughs rack armored frames. No reaction before disorientation invites Roman lances. Severus's sack of Ctesiphon showcased these urban traps within the capital's walls, evolving fortress surprises into street-level snares like collapsible pavements over pits, claiming fleeing nobles in the chaos of conquest. The emperor's triumphs, etched on arches back in Rome, hid the human cost. Legionaries choking on their own dust in tests gone awry, but the deceptions secured the east, if fleetingly. The pinnacle came under Caracalla in 216 after Christ, whose feigned friendship masked invasion. Traps evolving into grand ruses encamped near Arbela. His forces rigged entire valleys with interconnected nets. Wires from Eburon's webs scaled up, linked to catapults launching spiked grapnel. Parthian reinforcements, drawn by false retreat signals, gallop into the kill zone. Wires trip, grapnels fly, entangling horses in a web of iron that pulls tight, spikes piercing as beasts thrash. The ground becomes a living snare. Deceptions, culminating in a symphony of entrapment where mobility, the Parthians' strength, becomes their undoing. Caracalla's assassination soon after marred the victory, but the battle's legacy endured. Traps that deceived not just the eye but the very tactics of war, as the desert winds scattered the dust of these oriental battles, revealing horizons where Roman eagles clashed with Parthian arrows. We appreciate how deceptions here refined the empire's edge, innovations tested in fire and sand. From spiked dunes to blinding clouds, cunning met cunning, each side evolving in a dance of shadows. But such trials paled beside the frozen frontiers of the north, where traps faced barbaric hordes amid snow-swept wilds. We'll venture into those icy realms next, confronting the barbarians where Roman wit battled raw fury, and every flake concealed a potential peril. Venturing into those icy realms now, where the sun-baked deceptions of the Orient gave way to the frost-bitten frontiers of the north, we confront the barbarians amid snow-swept wilds, following Roman wit as it battled raw fury across frozen rivers and mist-shrouded forests that seemed to breathe with primal menace. The innovations tested against Parthian shadows adapted here to a harsher canvas, where traps had to endure blizzards and barbaric hordes whose ferocity matched the land's unforgiving chill, offering no quarter as axes cleaved through fog like specters from ancient sagas. Quintus, our sun-weary legionary from eastern sands, might have shivered upon reassignment to the Rhine or Danube, his traps evolving amid the crunch of ice underfoot, each snare a desperate bid to hold back the tide of fur-clad warriors who surged like winter storms. Picture the snow-blanketed banks of the Rhine in 9 after Christ, during the infamous Varus disaster in Teutoburg Forest, where Arminius's Germanic tribes turned Roman deceptions against their masters, but not before legionaries attempted to salvage with hasty traps. Quintus's comrades, marching through dense woods heavy with frost, hastily rigged paths with lilia pits disguised under fresh powder, stakes fire-hardened against the cold to prevent splintering. A Carusi warrior, his breath fogging the air like dragon smoke, charges with spear raised. The snow collapses, pit swallowing him whole, stakes piercing frozen leather and flesh with a muffled crack. No time to howl, the falls shock silences him as Roman counterattacks rain down. Yet the ambush's scale overwhelmed. Traps claimed dozens, but betrayal claimed legions. Varus's suicide a stark lesson that spurred northern evolutions, turning defeat into a forge for deadlier defenses. This catastrophe birthed a renaissance of northern traps, where innovations blended with the landscape's brutality. Under Tiberius's retaliatory campaigns around 15 after Christ, Romans fortified the limes with ice webs evolved from Eburon's designs, wires strung low across frozen fords, connected to submerged spikes that surfaced when pulled. Like Quintus, fingers numbed from cold, anchored these in river ice camouflaged with hoarfrost and debris. Caledonian or Frisian raiders, wading the shallows at twilight, snag the wires. Spikes erupt through the surface like jagged teeth, gashing legs amid splintering ice. The water churns chaotic, blood freezing in crimson patterns, no retreat possible. As hypothermia claims the wounded, Tiberius's doctrine emphasized environmental fusion, traps that used the North's freeze-thaw cycles, evolving simple pits into seasonal horrors that thawed into drowning pools come spring. Deeper in the barbaric North, traps countered the horde's sheer numbers with multiplied deception. At the Battle of Idistaviso in 16 after Christ, Germanicus faced Arminius again. His forces, deploying vast fields of caltrops, evolved into thorn clusters, bundled spikes linked by chains. Scattered from slings to cover retreats, Germanic infantry, bare-chested and bellowing war chants, pursue through muddy plains. Feet find the clusters, chains tangling ankles as spikes embed deep, turning pursuit into a hobbling mess. Pain radiates, warriors dropping shields to claw at wounds, exposed to Roman archers' volleys arcing like lethal snowflakes. Germanicus's victory owed to these deceptions that slowed the swift, evolving from oriental dust clouds into northern mires where mud amplified the agony. Barbarians, fury dulled by unrelenting pricks, feel the bite of those winters, the sting of wind-whipped snow against exposed skin, the crackle of fires where soldiers thawed frozen tools, the distant howl of wolves echoing barbaric yells. It wasn't sterile strategy. Survival hinged on camaraderie. Quintus sharing mulled wine with mates while rigging traps, their laughter a defiant spark against the gloom. Yet underlying the resolve was fear of being trapped themselves, as in Teutoburg's Ghosts. A tale from the Vindonissa fort around 30 after Christ speaks of a Rhesian auxiliary named Vitus who lost kin to tribal raids. He innovated snow sentinels, hollow effigies packed with lime and spikes, triggered to burst when toppled. Marauding Alemanni toppled one during a blizzard raid. Lime explodes in a caustic burst, burning eyes and skin amid flying barbs, the whiteout turning lethal. Vitus's creation, born of vengeance, evolved defenses into proactive lures, drawing barbarians into their own doom amid swirling flakes. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's bundle up against these chilly chronicles. Together, countering evolved further under Domitian around 83 after Christ. As chatty incursions tested the Taunus forts, Romans introduced Frostfang's underground torsion devices from Trajan's Tormentor, buried shallow and insulated with wool against freeze, launching barbed darts when stepped upon. Chatty warriors, sneaking through moonlit snowdrifts, pressed the plates, mechanisms thunk beneath the crust, darts piercing upward through boots and calves. No visible threat until blood stains the white. Domitian's aggressive limes pushed these innovations, traps linked in chains, one trigger setting off cascades, evolving isolated snares into orchestrated ambushes that decimated warbands before they reached walls. The emperor's paranoia fueled excess traps so dense that patrols risked them too, but they held the north. Barbarians whispering of haunted grounds where the earth itself bit back, in Britannia's northern wilds under Agricola around 84 after Christ. Traps faced Caledonian hit-and-run tactics, evolving into mobile deceptions carried by auxiliaries. barbarian baits, false camps with rigged tents, hiding pitfall floors, stakes beneath canvas lured Picts into complacency. A war party, spotting the abandoned site at dusk, rushes in for plunder. Floors collapse, pits claiming legs and snaps of bone and cries muffled by falling snow. Agricola's advance to Mons Gropius showcased these deceptions, drawing foes into open battle, where evolved caltrops halted chariot charges, wheels fouling in iron webs. The general's dispatches praise the trap's role, but omit the aftermath: wounded barbarians left to freeze, their pain a silent testament to Roman resolve. Climactic evolutions came under Marcus Aurelius in the Marcomannic Wars around 170 after Christ, where Quadi and Marcomanni hordes breached the Danube in winter assaults. Romans countered with thaw traps, dams rigged to burst, flooding frozen plains with spike-laced waters that refroze into deadly slicks. Quadi cavalry, galloping across what seemed solid ice, here cracks too late. Dams give, torrents surging, with floating estakas that impale as currents drag, bodies entomb in reforming ice, preserved in glassy tombs. The deceptions, cruelty amplified by nature's cycle. Marcus's philosophical musings contrast the brutality traps as necessary evils, but they saved the frontier, evolving from simple digs into environmental manipulations that turned the North's harshness against its sons. As the northern blizzards subside, revealing landscapes scarred by frost and folly, we reflect on how traps here forged resilience from adversity, deceptions adapting to barbaric tempests like hardy evergreens. From ice webs to thaw floods, Roman cunning held the line, anticipating every savage surge. But even empires weary, and as Rome's vigor waned, so did its traps, failing against the inexorable decline. We'll delve into that twilight next, where once mighty snares crumbled, and the past's ingenuity met the present's unraveling. Delving into that twilight now, where the northern blizzard's fierce trials gave way to the slow unraveling of an empire once unassailable. We trace the decline of Rome through the faltering of its traps, those ingenious deceptions that had long turned barbaric fury into futile echoes against wit and will. As the 3rd century after Christ wore on, under emperors like Aurelian scrambling to mend fracturing borders, the very snares that held the north began to betray their makers, failing not from lack of cunning but from the empire's own exhaustion. Thinned, legions diluted, and the relentless press of foes who learned to anticipate the once unseen perils. Quintus, a frostbitten veteran from Germanic frontiers, might have felt the shift in his bones during postings along the crumbling limes, where traps evolved no further but decayed, each malfunction a harbinger of the end, leaving defenders no buffer against the encroaching dark. Picture the besieged walls of Aquila in 238 after Christ, during Maximinus Thrax's turbulent reign, where Gothic incursions tested defenses worn by civil strife. The traps, once marvels like frost fangs and snow sentinels, now suffered from neglect. Ocean springs rusted in damp cellars, their wires brittle from unchecked winters. Quintus's cohort, under strength and morale low, hastily reset a field of caltrops before the gates, but poor iron from overtaxed forges bent under boots rather than piercing. A Gothic warband, shaggy beards iced with breath, charges through the haze. Spikes crumple harmlessly, offering no halt, axes cleaving into Roman shields unchecked. The failure cascades, pits unfilled from labor shortages yawn openly, barbarians leaping them with derisive laughs. The ground's betrayal, now Rome's own. Maximinus's assassination far away amplified the chaos, traps failing as symbols of an empire devouring itself. Pain not in wounds but in the hollow ring of abandoned ingenuity. The decline wasn't abrupt. It crept like frost over untended fields, eroding the evolutions that once defined Roman supremacy. By the crisis of the 3rd century, around 250 after Christ under Decius, invasions by Goths and Alemanni overwhelmed the Rhine-Danube frontiers. Innovations like thaw traps, reliant on maintained dams, collapsed under sabotaged barbarians, wiser from captured Roman deserters, diverted rivers upstream, flooding legionary camps instead. Quintus, perhaps commanding a watchtower, hears the ominous groan of cracking wood at night. Waters surge, carrying away spiked barriers in a torrent that drowns comrades in their sleep. No clever trigger saves them. The trap reversed. Evolution, installed by betrayal and overextension. The North's chill claiming Romans as readily as foes. Decius's death at Abritus, ambushed in marshes where traps might have turned the tide, underscored the frailty. Deceptions failing when legions prioritized survival over sophistication. Deeper fissures appeared in the east, where Sassanid Persians, under Shapur I, exploited Roman weaknesses around 260 after Christ, capturing Emperor Valerian in a humiliation that echoed Cahae's ghosts. Parthian-style deceptions, once countered by lime clouds and whispering dunes, faltered as supply lines frayed. Caustic powders diluted by corrupt quartermasters billowing weakly against armored cataphracts. In the siege of Edessa, Roman walls, hidden after traps meant to ignite on impact, but clogged mechanisms from sand and disused spewed harmless smoke. Persian sappers breach unopposed, the failure intimate. A young engineer, heir to Gaius's legacy, yanks a lever in vain, flames sputtering as enemies pour through, his final moments a blur of regret amid collapsing stone. Shapur's triumph, parading Valerian as a footstool, marked the trap's nadir, ingenuity undermined by internal rot. The empire's decline mirrored in mechanisms that jammed when needed most. Feel the weariness of those final stands, the acrid bite of rust on fingers inspecting failed gears, the distant clamor of barbarian horns growing bolder, the faint warmth of campfires where soldiers whispered of better days. It wasn't total collapse. Pockets of resilience lingered, like under Aurelian in 270 after Christ, who briefly restored order with hasty repairs to the limes. Yet even his restorer of the world title couldn't revive the full evolution traps patched with scavenged wood. Their surprise is predictable to spies who infiltrated depleted ranks. In one skirmish near the Danube, a Thor trap bursts prematurely from shoddy construction, flooding Roman positions. Quintus wades through icy sludge, spikes meant for enemies now hazards to allies. The pain of frostbite, a slow thief, as barbarians watch from afar, laughing at the self-inflicted wound. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's wander these fading paths in quiet reflection. The human cost mounted in this era, stories of the fallen multiplying as traps turned treacherous. A Thracian auxiliary named Drusus, guarding the Aurelian walls of Rome itself around 275 after Christ, hastily built with integrated pitfall steps wrong during a drill. A collapsing floor claiming his leg in stakes meant for invaders. His screams echo through the eternal city, metaphor for decline. Defenses biting their defenders, innovation inverted by neglect. Families back home received meager pensions, widows weaving tales of heroic traps that once saved empires, now relics. In a world unraveling, barbarian kings like Sieneva of the Goths learned from these failures, adopting Roman deceptions against their originators, pits and spikes, turning the tide at Naissus where Emperor Claudius Gothicus perished, though his victory stemmed the flood. Temporarily by the 4th century under Constantine around 312 after Christ, traps saw a brief revival in civil wars, like at the Milvian Bridge where spiked barriers channeled Maxentus's forces into the Tiber's grasp. Yet the empire's Christian turn shifted focus resources to churches over frontiers. Traps falling into disrepair as legions converted to new faiths, their wit dulled by doctrinal debates. In the west, under Honorius around 410 after Christ, Alaric's Visigoths sacked Rome, bypassing Aurelian's walls through treachery. Hidden ports, meant as surprises, became entry points when guards deserted. The failure complete, traps that once evoked dread now overgrown with vines. Symbols of an ingenuity that couldn't outlast internal decay. Eastern remnants under Theodosius, around 395 after Christ, clung longer, evolving traps into Byzantine fire ships and Greek fire. But the western fall in 476 after Christ marked the Endodoacer deposing Romulus Augustulus, the last traps buried under barbarian boots that trod, unhindered. Quintus's descendants, scattered in the ruins, might have pondered by dying fires how such marvels failed. The pain of loss a quiet dirge for an era's close dot as the shadows of decline lengthen, enveloping the remnants of once mighty snares. In forgotten earth, we sense the sensory legacies that linger, odors of rust and rot, sounds of crumbling stone that connect us to the past's tangible echoes. We'll immerse in those legacies next, where smells and noises revive the ancient world, bridging the chasm between then and now in evocative whispers. Immersing in those sensory legacies now, where the shadows of Rome's decline linger like faint echoes in crumbling ruins, we awaken the scents and sounds of the past that bridge the chasm between faded ingenuity and our quiet reflection, reviving the ancient world through the subtle whispers of earth and air that once enveloped the traps and their makers. As the empire's traps faltered and fell silent, their remnants carried forward a tapestry of sensations, the metallic temps of rusted iron, the muffled thud of collapsing mechanisms that evoked the human essence behind the stone and steel, reminding us how history isn't just seen but felt in the nostrils and ears, a serene connection to the lives that pulsed amid the decay. Quintus, our weary sentinel from northern frosts and eastern sands, might have inhaled deeply in his final days, the aromas of pine resin and forged smoke mingling with the rot of neglected ditches, each breath a testament to the sensory world that outlasted the empire's grandeur. Picture the overgrown fields along the Rhine limes in the 5th century after Christ, where abandoned caltrops lie half-buried in loamy soil, their iron oxidized to a reddish patina that releases a sharp, earthy scent when disturbed by a farmer's plow. The air carries the legacy of those traps, a faint, acrid bite of corrosion, blending with the fresh mud churned up like the sweat-soaked dirt of legionaries who once scattered them. Nearby, a collapsed fossa exhales the musty odor of decayed wood stakes rotted to mulch, their fire-hardened tips softened by time, releasing a damp fungal whisper that hints at the blood they once drew. Quintus, retired to a modest villa perhaps, would recognize that smell in his dreams, the metallic undercurrent of blood on spikes. now faded to rust's quiet rustle, a sound like brittle leaves crunching underfoot as wind stirs the overgrowth, evoking the snap of mechanisms long seized. These scents weren't mere remnants. They wove into the daily rhythm of the declining world, sensory markers of ingenuity's twilight. In the ruins of Duraropos, where naphtha traps once spewed fiery breath, the ground still holds pockets of terry residue, exhaling a bitter petroleum tang when rains wash the sands. Imagine a Byzantine traveler in the 6th century, pausing amid the crumbled walls, the air heavy with that oily sharpness, mingled with the sweet decay of date palms reclaiming the site. The sounds accompany a low hiss as wind funnels through breached embrasures, mimicking the sizzle of ignited pitch that once scorched invaders. No grand roar, now just a gentle susurrus like a sigh from the past, carrying the echo of screams. Muffled by flames, softened by centuries into a lullaby of loss. Quintus's descendants, scavenging for metal, might have paused at that sound. The legacy stirring ancestral memories of traps that burned bright before failing. Deeper legacies unfold in the auditory whispers of forgotten fortresses, where the North's icy traps left sonic imprints in the landscape. Along Hadrian's Wall, weathered stones hum with the vibration of passing carts, a faint resonance that recalls the creak of torsion springs winding tight in frost fangs. A shepherd in the early Middle Ages, herding sheep through misty moors, hears the groan of shifting earthhold pits settling further, their muffled thumps like distant heartbeats beneath the turf. The scent follows, a crisp, mineral chill of frozen soil thawing, laced with the faint rod of wool insulation long dissolved, evoking the wool-wrapped mechanisms that once protected against freeze. These sensations humanized the decline, not abstract failure, but tangible remnants that spoke of hands that oiled gears, noses that wrinkled at the sharp tang of lime dust, ears attuned to the warning click before a dart launched. Feel the immersion in those echoes, the cool dampness of morning dew amplifying the musty exhalation from a lilia pit. Now a harmless depression filled with rainwater that mirrors the sky, the sound of droplets plinking into the pool, a rhythmic patter like the drip of blood from ancient wounds, blends with the rustle of leaves and wind-swept branches overhead, mimicking the camouflage that once hid deadly surprises. It wasn't all melancholy. Sweeter legacies persisted, like the herbal aroma of salves used on puncture wounds, lavender and honey lingering in soil where medics tended the fallen, a soothing counterpoint to the metallic bite of spikes. In one imagined vignette from the late Empire, a child playing near a ruined castra unearths a caltrop, its scent of aged iron sharp in the air. The clink, as it drops back to earth, echoes the scatter of thousands, a playful sound belying the pain it once caused. Subscribe if you like the video, and let's linger in these sensory whispers a while longer. Yet these legacies extended beyond ruins into cultural memory, scents and sounds preserved in folklore and rituals. In medieval Gaul, villagers avoided cursed grounds where Roman traps lay buried, the air thick with a spectral mustiness they attributed to ghosts. The low moan of wind through hollowed stakes became tales of moaning spirits, sensory echoes, fueling legends. Eastern monasteries near old frontiers burned incense reminiscent of naphtha's bite, a ritual purification against the stench of war, while the chime of bells echoed the alert vibrations of whispering dunes. Quintus's line, perhaps monks now, inhaled that frankincense, its resinous warmth a balm over the acrid past, the sounds of chanting overlaying the remembered twang of releasing bows. Aquatic legacies persisted along rivers like the Danube, where submerged spikes rusted into reefs, exhaling a brackish metallic odor when low waters exposed them. Fishermen in the Dark Ages hauled nets snagged on these, the scrape of iron against wood a grating reminder of thaw traps bursts, water gurgling like the floods that once drowned foes. The scent of algae-cloaked metal, tangy and green, mingled with fish scales, evoking the coppery blood that once tinted currents red. These sensations grounded history not in scrolls, but in the nose's memory of forge smoke, the ear's recall of collapsing earth, bridging decline to rebirth. Urban echoes in Rome itself, where Aurelian's walls stood amid the city's hum, hid sensory surprises in overgrown sections, pits filled with debris exhaling the sour rot of forgotten refuse, sounds of rats scurrying like the patter of caltrops scattered in haste. Pilgrims in the 5th century, drawn to Christian sites, caught whiffs of lime from old caustic pits, a chalky dryness that tickled throats, whispering of blinding clouds that failed to hold back the hordes. The legacy soothed in its way, scents of blooming vines overtaking spikes, sounds of birdsong replacing war cries, nature's gentle reclamation over man's cruel craft. As these sensory legacies fade into the ether, like the last wisps of smoke from a dying forge, they invite us to connect the ancient world's tangible essence with our present. Drawing eternal lessons from the aromas and echoes that outlived empires, we'll forge that bridge next, exploring how the past's wit and woes inform today's world, in a reflective tie that binds history to the here and now. Forging that bridge now, where the sensory legacies of scents and sounds draw us gently into the present, we arrive at a reflective pause, contemplating the eternal lessons woven through Rome's traps from their cunning rise to poignant decline, threads that connect ancient ingenuity to our modern world, inviting a serene farewell to this journey through time's tranquil corridors. As the echoes of rustling leaves and distant thumps fade into the hum of contemporary life, we see how those deceptions, born of necessity and tempered by human frailty, offer timeless wisdom, the art of anticipation, the cost of neglect, and the enduring power of adaptation. Lessons that whisper softly in our ears like a bedtime story, urging us to close our eyes and drift toward restful dreams. Quintus, our faithful companion through deserts, forests, and frosts, might smile from the annals of history, his legacy not in forgotten spikes but in the quiet reflections they inspire today. Where ancient perils remind us of our own vulnerabilities and strengths, consider how Rome's traps, those silent guardians that demanded no reaction time, mirror our contemporary defenses, cyber firewalls and security algorithms that anticipate digital threats with algorithmic precision, evolving much like the torsion springs and chemical caustics of old. In a world of instant data breaches and unseen hackers, we deploy virtual caltrops, encrypted honeypots that lure intruders into revealing themselves, no different from the baited pits that once ensnared Gallic scouts under moonlit skies. The lesson endures. Foresight saves lives, whether on muddy battlefields or in the glow of screens, where a single click can unleash chaos as swiftly as a hidden stake. Yet, just as Roman traps failed from internal decay-rusted mechanisms and divided loyalties, so do our systems falter from neglected updates and human error, a reflective echo that cautions us against complacency, urging vigilance in an age where perils hide in code rather than earth. Deeper connections emerge in the human stories that flavored those ancient snares, their pain and camaraderie resonating in today's conflicts and collaborations. The fallen legionary, gasping in a Lilia pit, finds parallel in the modern soldier ensnared by roadside IEDs, where ingenuity meets cruelty in improvised traps that evolve with each skirmish. We learn from Rome's decline. Overextension breeds vulnerability. As empires or nations stretch thin, their defenses crumbling under the weight of ambition. Quintus's weary reflections by a dying campfire parallel the quiet moments of today's engineers, pondering ethical algorithms in dimly lit labs, weighing the balance between protection and overreach. The sensory legacies amplify this. The acrid scent of gunpowder today evokes naphtha's bite, while the crack of explosions mirrors the thud of rolling boulders, binding past to present in a chain of shared experience that teaches empathy amid innovation. Yet, these lessons aren't all grim. They bloom with hope in everyday adaptations, where Roman wit inspires sustainable solutions. Urban planners draw from circumvallations, designing green barriers, hedges laced with sensors that deter intruders while nurturing ecosystems, evolving the spiked abatis into harmonious defenses. In medicine, traps transform into therapeutic tools, nanoscale pits that capture cancer cells, no reaction time for the disease to spread, a benevolent twist on the fastest merciless grasp. The North's Thor traps, harnessing nature's cycles, echo climate strategies today managed floods that protect coastlines, turning environmental fury into ally, much as Romans once did with rivers and snow. Quintus would nod approvingly, his air is grit fueling our renewable energies. Where wind turbines hum like vigilant sentinels, their blades slicing air with the precision of swinging scythes, generating power instead of peril. Feel the warmth of this continuity, the scent of fresh earth from a garden plot evoking the dig of a legionary spade, the sound of rain pattering on leaves like javelins on shields, sensory bridges that make history alive and relatable. In education, we teach these tales to children, boring history for sleep becoming engaging narratives that spark curiosity. Roman traps as metaphors for problem solving, where a puzzle's hidden twist demands clever anticipation. The empire's fall warns against division. In our polarized times, neglected traps like diplomatic firewalls fail when unity frays, echoing the 3rd century's chaos. But Rome's resilience inspires, rising from Teutoburg's ashes to Trajan's peaks, reminding us that decline isn't destiny. Adaptation the key to renewal. Subscribe if you liked the video, and carry these serene tales into your dreams. As we near the end of this immersive voyage, let's linger on the reflective core. Rome's traps, so dangerous you'd have no time to react, were ultimately human creations, flawed, brilliant, and ephemeral. They connected eras through shared struggles, from Lucius's early ditches to Quintus' final watch, each innovation a step in humanity's dance with survival. In the present, they urge us to build traps not just for defense, but for progress, ethical AI that anticipates harm, communities that ensnare division with unity's net, the past and present entwined like vines over ancient spikes, lessons eternal in their whisper. Relax now, let the weight of history ease into slumber, the world's perils softened by wisdom's gentle embrace. With this serene farewell, envision yourself reclining under a starry sky, much like those ancient nights, the soft rustle of wind in trees, a lullaby from time's depths. We've journeyed from Rome's cunning dawn to its reflective dusk, through traps that shaped an empire, and now we shape our thoughts. Close your eyes, breathe deeply the sense of memory, hear the fading echoes of ingenuity, and drift into peaceful rest, knowing history's stories continue in dreams, ever evolving, ever connected. Good night, dear listener, until the next tranquil tale calls.